Welcome to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. I am Brent Lee.
And I'm Neil Sanders.
And I'm Greg Hall. Welcome to Movie Night. Welcome. For this Movie Night episode on Some Dare Call It a Conspiracy podcast, I made the terrible decision to suggest watching Tommy Robinson's newly released propaganda film, Lawfare, a Totalitarian State. Foolishly, Brent and Neil agreed. And despite the group text blowing up with text from Neil only just over 1 minute into watching the film and instantly regretting this decision, the die had already been cast. We were committed. Similar to the commitment of members of Opus Dei who are into self-flagellation. This would surely be a painful endeavour, but with the hope of some reward at the end. Let's hope, yeah. Firstly, a little bit of context on the man behind the film. In the summer of 2009, a small group called the United Peoples of Luton had formed as a response to a counter-protest, Al-Majaharun, a small Salafist group who had gained headlines by controversially picketing the Royal Anglican Regiment's parade returning from Afghanistan. Generating a similar response in headlines, the United Peoples of Luton very quickly coalesced into the broader English Defence League, encompassing a loose network of football casual firms, right-wing activists, and other nefarious individuals drawn to the fringes of extremist politics. And the leader to emerge from this anti-jihadist street movement was Tommy Robinson, aka the grifter formerly known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon. In fact, he's been known by a number of names, it's hard to keep up, but it was under the identity of Tommy Robinson, a former local football hooligan, that he rose to fame. Framing himself as the common sense voice of the working class. Though if we were to be much more stricter with our Marxist analysis, and I know he's a huge fan of Karl Marx from watching his film, he's probably much more the petty bourgeois, a product of Thatcher's nation of shopkeepers, with his pearly white dentures, year-round suntan, and uncritical embracing of capitalism as a personal identity. He is the political equivalent of the live, laugh, love ornament adorning prefabs across the country. Tacky, over-sentimental, and profoundly hollow. Not interested in improving the material conditions of the working class, but rather extracting it from them to line his own pocket. His entrepreneurial spirit and Protestant work ethic may have had the foundations in his empire of tanning salons, but excelled to new heights with the rise of the EDL, which was effectively a money-making scheme in t-shirts, flags, and merchandise. What George Lucas' Star Wars was to cinema, Tommy Robinson was to Patriots in terms of merchandising. And despite the EDL collapsing after a couple of years, splintering into offshoots, Tommy Robinson has reinvented himself more times than Madonna. From concerned local citizen of Luton, mysterious icon of football hooligans, female rights activist, political prisoner, martyr, to now crediting himself as a journalist and author. Spoiler alert, he's an absolute fraud. He claims to be a journalist, but under every guise, his political aims have been the absolute same, and that's to mobilize a presence on the streets. He has flirted with other kind of electoral politics, but he seems most comfortable in street mobilizations, even though he's often spotted fleeing in taxis once there's trouble. But he perpetually repeats this strategy, and he has done for decades. Just this month he mobilised a march in central London, and he would do the same again in a couple of weeks. As a strategy alone, it's quite ineffective. Ultimately, it will kind of run out of steam. But the streets is what we can call a precinct of power, and it's his domain. It's from here he hopes to apply pressure to those within the corridors of government. So let's talk about the history of the streets. The opposition to right-wing street mobilizations has a very rich history, from the 1930s Battle of Cable Street against Oswald Mosley's Black Shirts to post-World War II formation of the 43 Group, Jewish ex-servicemen who continued to confront, prevent and drive the British Union and fascists from the streets. Later in the 1970s, you have the opposition to the National Front with the historical Battle of Lewisham from 1977. That continued, you had groups such as the Red Action and the formation of Anti-Fascist Action, AFA, which that network confronted and ultimately destroyed the National Front's presence on the streets. And the leaders of the far right, they strategically shifted to electoral politics with the British National Party. They seeked respectability, swapping their braces and boots for suits and ties. And they left the fringe elements to become more extreme with the formation of things like Combat 18. And ultimately, the victory for militant anti-fascists came with the historic Battle of Waterloo in 1992, when fascists travelling to a blood and honour gig were attacked and decimated. The far right had lost the streets, and their electoral success was also insignificant. And this had left a void where the right wing had fundamentally lost control of the streets until the rise of Tommy Robinson. And while his actions and intentions are certainly bigoted, racist and hateful, he has spent a majority of his career trying to convince us all he is not racist. One of the earliest videos from the EDL was them burning a swastika. An early documentary exposing who was behind the EDL had a cringe moment when Tommy's cousin, Kev Carroll, revealed he has a biracial daughter. But Tommy Robinson, he's been a chameleon. He's wrapped in the language of being a patriot, but distancing himself from the old style of fascism. He wasn't like John Tyndall's NF or Nick Griffin's BNP. I mean, just his position alone on Israel is in complete opposition to someone like Nick Griffin. Nick Griffin is such an anti-Semite that he just hates Israel because he sees it through the prism of the Zog conspiracy. Whereas someone like Tommy Robinson absolutely idolizes Israel because it is such a supremacist state. Tommy Robinson's mobilizations fit within the historical trajectory of what is known as the church and king mobs. A rowdy mob, usually drawn from the lower echelons of society, who would take to the streets to demand whatever the church and or king has told them to demand, often scapegoating some foreign alien for their woes. So while he's never claimed the banner of fascism, his tactic of street mobilizations and building the confidence of the right wing can certainly lead down that road. He's not interested in overthrowing power itself, but rather influencing those at top in his favour. He doesn't want to rock the status quo, but rather push it to a further dominant extreme of tradition, monarchy, patriotic loyalty, respect to the ruling class. He clearly has a kink for being dominated. If anything, Tommy Robinson is a bootlicker of the establishment rather than the dissenting voice he likes to brand himself as. His one consistency through his many reinventions has been his role as an everyman orator, which he seems to do well. He comes across as this kind of cheeky lad, just an average guy who's speaking truth to power, kind of Daniel against Goliath. So while we may laugh at him, and no doubt over the course of this show, I'm sure we will, it can't be denied and shouldn't be ignored that he connects with an audience of disillusioned people and he exploits their fear for his own intentions. And while his strategy of just street mobilizations may be limited, it does build up his own power and sway, which when connected with other intersecting political agendas can all lead towards a more dangerous, authoritarian state. Ironic, really, because that's what he claims to be against. Lawfare, a totalitarian state, is nothing more than a propaganda piece, censoring Tommy Robinson as its victim. It embraces the language and tropes of conspiracism in the hope of broadening his appeal and furthering his ideas towards a more paranoid, right-wing delusion of reality. The title itself really struck me as sounding like an Alex Jones Infowar documentary from 20 years ago. And it is this development and growth between the right wing and conspiracy theories that made me want to subject Brent and Neil to watching it. Sorry for making you watch it, I hope that wasn't too long of an intro. But what did you guys think of this film?
Apology not accepted.
I was even more annoyed because I'd misread the title and I thought it said Tommy Robinson, A Total State. And I thought, oh, brilliant. This will be accurate. But no. It's very interesting that you say that it's got the Alex Jones title, because that was one of the things that was striking me as I was watching it, was that he's watched some conspiracy documentaries. The way that it was presented, the way that they introduce topic and build an argument by layering stuff on top of stuff. When you sort of look at it, it presents the appearance of having an argument, but he didn't really. It was very thin. But it used the similar sort of Gish Gallop tactics that you do see in Alex Jones films and David Icke sort of presentations and Chris Everard. He reminded me of like the Illuminati style documentaries. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
But yeah, we were discussing beforehand, like people were made to stand and watch this, like the protest the other day. Like he showed it, didn't he, or whatever? It's 90 minutes long. But it seems like it's like going to space or something. It's like, has it really been 90 minutes? Because I've aged 1,000 years.
Well, this is the thing. See, it's 90 minutes, it's an hour and a half. So it took me 2.5 hours to get through because I had to keep stopping it. But how long did it take you?
Ages. I started, right, and you know what? Okay, I spent all Saturday finding jobs. Like, oh, I've got to rehang that cupboard. I've got to go to the shops. Oh, I really should go and like do this. And avoiding sitting down and watching the bloody film. And as soon as I sat down and watched it, I thought, oh no, this is going to take me forever. It took me over 5 hours because I started watching it on Saturday whenever I text you. And I watched it until about 9-10 at night. So God knows how long that was. And then I got up the next day and I was like, all right, I need to fucking watch this. And I started about 11. And then whatever time I text you and said, right, that's it. It's a load of bollocks, that is. Like, so God knows how long I actually did.
That was 10 to 3 in the afternoon.
Right. Okay. So it was 5 hours on Sunday. Okay. And then about 3 or 4 hours on Saturday. So it took about 8 hours to watch. I could have done a day's work to watch this sodding film. Like, oh God. Yeah.
It's been painful.
Well, the thing was, it was a bit like when we looked at Pandemic 3. The second that it came on, I was like, there's a lot in this. This potentially could do with a deep dive. Because, I know this is silly, right? Because it's like, it's got 5 million views already on Twitter. As like, you know, as if we're going to make a dent into that. But I thought, you know, if you're going to give this sort of stuff the oxygen of publicity, you need to treat it responsibly. And call out the stuff that he was doing. Now, it's such a bad film that basically I went through it, and every time something happened, I went, right, I'm going to check that. So I went and checked it. So it's not as thorough as if we're going to do a deep dive, because like if we did a deep dive, I'd have gone and looked at the studies and the blah, you know, all of this and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, spoilers. It's 90 minutes long, and as far as I can tell, there's only 2 things in it that have any relevance, like any sort of reasonable connection to the truth. Everything else in it is either misrepresented or a complete and total lie. It's propaganda, and it's obvious propaganda. And what's really sort of childish and sort of shitty about it as well is that basically it's really Tommy Robinson moaning about how hard done to he is and trying to present himself as like a martyr, and then tie it into a sort of a broader idea that, well, this is happening to all of us, but it isn't. And he's just whinging and moaning. He's literally just used the film to go, I'm being persecuted, but I'm being persecuted. It's not because of it's not the consequences of my actions. Absolutely not. It's some sort of cultural thing that will affect you, and it will affect you, so send me money. And the grift is so transparent right from the off that it really made me, it made me sort of, it's like, really, Jesus Christ, is this is it? This is all that you need to do. I think I've said this before, okay? I've often thought about like starting a racist punk band, just because like most racist punk bands are shit, really shit. Like you don't have to be very good to get really, really popular and successful, right? And so, you know, you might be tempted to do that. It's like, but yeah, it's just not a very good film. Not a very good film. Does make a very strong argument. And it's poorly put together. And it's just like, what made me laugh is it's just like, it's like a sort of, I'm trying to think, you know, like some Christmas specials where it's like celebrities. It's like a sort of Christmas special where celebrities pop, like Noel's house party. Right? It's like a Noel's house party if it was at Wewelsburg Castle and it was Goebbels' house party, and everyone that turned up was a cunt. Like that's basically how I see it. Yeah, that is like that.
Yeah, too many terrible people turned up in it, even within the first 5 minutes. It's just like a roulette wheel of
grifters and kind of conspiracy, you know, fearmongers. But it's funny you kind of mentioned Plandemic 3, because literally the moment I started watching this, within about the first 30 seconds, I was like, oh no, this is basically Plandemic 3 with even less research, which says a lot, because Plandemic 3 pretty much sets such a low bar with its level of research. But everything about it, like, you know, the pounding music, the like overuse of visual effects and like really bad edit transitions, like all of that, the use of quotations to seem much more kind of intelligent. It just used all the kind of conventions of every single conspiracy theory film. And like with Plandemic 3, it just completely centered him as this victim and martyr on this hero's journey.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was pretty lazy. It was just basically him in a studio, right, ranting for 90 minutes with some interviews.
With this vein, like, standing out on the side of his head, like that scene in How to Get Ahead in Advertising. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, something was spurring that young man on. Like, he seemed very determined. But yeah, it was poor. But what got me as well was, if I was still in my conspiratorial mind and I was watching that, I'd have been angry with it, because it pandered to that audience in a way that was exploitative, I thought. And the annoying thing is that I don't think that people are going to see that. I think that it's that easy nowadays that you just say, oh, well, Tommy said a couple of things that I agree with, so Tommy's all right now. And it's like, really? Like, wow, okay, that's it. And to be honest, you know, already Iconic and various other people have done that. Like, they've had him on us. We might not agree with everything that he says, like, but, you know, we'll have him on. It's like, why? Why would you? And this is where it really gets annoying, because it's not even ideological. They don't care about spreading the message, like either of them. David Icke doesn't really care. He doesn't want to, like, spread the message to the EDL lot that the lizards are there. And Tommy Robinson doesn't want to spread to the lizards crowds the idea that basically, like, you know, we should kill all Muslims or whatever it is that he thinks this week. It's just a pure grift to get audience so that they can get revenue. And that's what's so tacky about the whole thing, is that I don't think either of them, Icke or Robinson, really believe their shit. I think they do to a point where it makes them money. But I don't think, and they both portray themselves as like, you know, I'll throw myself on a grenade, you know, like trench warfare, I'll do this, I'll blah, blah, blah. No. I don't buy that. I don't believe that either of you are that invested in the cause that you profess to sort of put forward. I think you've just used it as a means to get attention, lionization and money.
I really found out, like, with the inclusion of all the anti-vaccine stuff, because, like, I've followed Tommy Robinson for so long. It was kind of odd seeing him in this light, but it was almost like the anti-vax stuff. It was almost half-hearted. Like, it didn't bother to go that deep and even offer, like, statistics, etc. It's like every time he mentioned the vaccine, it was like nod, nod, wink, wink. Like he was just literally paying lip service to the crowd. Like you say, it was so thin.
Yeah, really, really embarrassing, wasn't it? Like, to be quite honest, but hey ho.
Do you want to explain a little bit about your background with the EDL?
Yeah,
because people look. You just said like, oh, I followed Tommy for a long time, and people might get the wrong idea and say that you were following Tommy.
Oh God, no, yeah. Well, hopefully, like the introduction kind of made it clear what kind of side of the line. But I will kind of talk a little bit about this because there's something quite ironic in this film where someone I know is called like a undercover police copper. So I'll come back to this a little bit, but I guess look, some of my background was for many years around 2008, 2012, around during the period of the EDL. I was kind of heavily involved in anti-fascism, predominantly in Whitechapel and East London, and Tower Hamlets became quite a big spot for the EDL. And there was a lot of just ongoing stuff. Some of them sometimes would drink at the Salmon and Bull, which is a famous fascist pub in Bethnal Green. There was like moments where Tommy tried to like provoke a lot of the youth in Tower Hamlets. So yeah, without kind of incriminating myself or any people, any of my friends, I've been on the fringes, I should say, of anti-fascism, militant anti-fascism, but also organising in the community against fascism and particularly against the EDL. And yeah, I've just seen it from the inception and kind of come into conflict with him and his people.
Yeah, I thought that'd be important because that's why we asked you to lead this one, you know. Not only because you subjected us to it, but you've got this personal connection to it, which is kind of like what our shows are all about, trying to share our personal experience down certain rabbit holes or with certain communities.
And also to show that, like, you know, it's a short step from I'm a bit concerned about this vaccine to watching some shit like this, and then all of a sudden being persuaded by some of the other arguments. Not even necessarily because of the strength of the arguments, because of the sense of community that you get from finding new information and finding a group of like-minded people who are all your mates now, and they're all going to send you videos and stuff and go, oh, don't worry if you don't like all of it, right? Okay, nobody likes all of it at the beginning, do they? Right, okay. So, you know, you subject yourself to a period of psychological grooming, and also a lot of people are disenfranchised at the minute. And this is nothing new, right? Okay. Telling disenfranchised white people that the cause of all their problems is people who are not white, right? Okay, is not a new concept, right? Okay, it's like, but it's surprisingly effective and successful time and time and time again, even when it doesn't make any sense. You know, we live in hard times, don't we? You know, Cozzy lives, people still recovering from COVID and the lockdowns and stuff like that. People are still recovering from fucking 2008 and the financial crash. Like, you know, we live in a time where there's a lot of avenues for people looking for people to blame and for an explanation of why everything is so shit and why everything seems so random. And, you know, as we've discussed before, it's a lot easier to sort of cope with life if you think that things aren't random, that they're in some way planned or part of a grander plan or the result of a grander plan or something like that.
I mean, it's always during periods of like economic difficulties.
Yeah.
That kind of fascism kind of rears its head and, like you say, having excuses and people to blame. And when watching this, I was really thinking a lot about Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger, as well, and about this idea about doppelgangers and othering. And often in this whole film, like Tommy Robinson, when he's talking about people being brainwashed, following a crowd, following an ideology, I'm like, man, you're just talking about yourself and all the people that have followed you and everything you've done. So
that did not go unnoticed.
Yeah, same. I just kept shouting at the screen, that's you!
Yeah, that's you!
Fucking talking about you moron. Yeah, no, totally. So the film basically starts with Tommy Robinson, 42 seconds in. He moans about being arrested on November 26th in London. And he says that basically, like, you know, he was arrested whilst he was having breakfast. He's a journalist. And that's a lie. Or the way that he presents it is a lie. He says, and I quote, "I had committed no crime." But that's not true, because what happened was he was banned from going to the area because people knew essentially that he was going to go and rabble-rouse, and because he had a reputation for doing this. They'd spoken to the organisers of the march and decided that they didn't want his presence there. So the police had communicated this beforehand to him. The police said, "We were in frequent contact with the organisers. He was warned on more than one occasion that his continued presence was likely to cause harm and harassment." And then he decided to film it, make a scene, try and scuffle with the police, and they ended up getting pepper sprayed and arrested. Or taken away from the area. I don't know if he was actually arrested or kept in cells or anything like that. But essentially, the film has started with 42 seconds in, and he's lied. He's lied to your face. And he's lied to your face with something that you could just go and check pretty simply on the internet. He then follows this up by basically going into this concept that we don't live in a free nation anymore. He says, do we have freedom of press? Do we have freedom of assembly? Do we have freedom of speech? And the problem with this documentary is that the answer to all those questions is yes. Yes, we do, right? He then follows it up by saying, do we live in a totalitarian state? And the answer is no. Because if we did, this film wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? So we're about 1:50 seconds in at this point. And the entire point of his documentary is moot. Everything that he's put up as a proposition, do we have freedom of the press? And he's going to say no, but we do. Do we have freedom of assembly? Yes. You had a fucking assembly where you showed this shit film. Do we have freedom of speech? Yes. You've just made a film expressing that you have freedom of speech. And do we live in a totalitarian state? Well, evidently not. Otherwise, all of those things wouldn't be happening. And you'd already be dead.
I got to jump in, all right? Because the first thing I started thinking about with the freedom of speech thing, we only have that because of the EHRC.
Yeah.
And what do these people want to do? Get rid of the EHRC.
Yeah.
Human rights. So
yeah,
you want to get rid of free speech, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's because of the ignorance of that whole thing. I don't want to get rid of human rights. I mean, not for me, obviously, only for people of colour. And I'm sure that when we get rid of human rights, those in power will be savvy enough to note that slight distinction. But no, they won't, you silly sods. Like, if you get rid of human rights, then you get rid of rights for all humans, regardless of what pigmentation they happen to be.
I think this whole, like, we see this repeating a lot with Tommy Robinson. Like, the whole seed of this film is this arrest, like you say, on the 26th of November, where he frames himself as a victim, but basically it was a setup. Like, he was warned not to be there, etc., etc. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was inflaming the situation. Like, the reason I wanted to almost read that intro was like the founding, the whole people, the Luton people's, founding was all about courting controversy, turning up and creating that moment. And we see it throughout his career, if you will. And all of the examples he uses in this film are always people making a situation potentially explosive and potentially dangerous, getting themselves effectively arrested, and then basically claiming to be a victim.
Yeah, almost as if it's like a publicity stunt or something like that, in order to sell a brand.
His whole politics is based on being a publicity stunt. That is kind of what he does. And I think like what he does and what a lot of these documentaries do, like they take examples like even him being arrested and being pepper sprayed. They take examples of like where the police potentially may have been heavy-handed. They use examples of where, the state is a liberal democracy, but the state can still be authoritarian. It can still, kettle protests. It can still do these things, but that isn't communism. Like what he sees it as is just that's what the state does. And they do it to everyone. They don't just do it to you, Tommy, and like your patriots, but in fact, all these people, Muslims, black communities, working class communities, they've all been subjected to like the strong arm of the state. So this whole thing of like two-tier policing is just like bonkers. They're like absolute bonkers.
Yeah. What he's essentially saying, and we'll come on to that when I explain the two-tier policing thing, but he's essentially saying, I don't like the consequences of my actions. That's it. That's just... So he then goes on, right, and he flashes up a quote, which I can't remember if it's from Tacitus, it might be, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the law. And like, he's done this to try and come across as like a sort of academic, but he's actually come across more like Del Boy trying to use French phrases. And here's the key to this, right? Okay, that's bollocks, right? That is libertarian small government bullshit, right? Okay, what he's really talking about there is regulation, right? He's trying to just throw this out so that you get an idea. What the quote is used for, right, is to say, I want small government. And like, some people might immediately be going, are we really comparing Romans to our current situation? And we think that tracks and that we could totally, like, do these things. They threw people to lions. Like, I don't think that the rules are quite the same. And the way that the systems are set up are quite the same. But essentially, all right, so let's look at something like the construction industry. Would you say that the more rules that you have in the building industry would make it more corrupt? Or would you say that if there were less rules in the building industry, that it would be more corrupt? Which do you think?
Yeah, I think the answer is obvious.
Well, exactly. So which means that the way that they've used this quote, what they're trying to say is the nanny state, oversight, 1984, look at all these rules and regulations. But actually what they're trying to say is like, we want to get away with shit, right? And the way that quote is used is nonsense. Like, because it doesn't track to reality. Like, you do... In school, do you want more rules or do you want less rules about how teachers interact with your children? Which would give the opportunity for more corruption? Well, it would be less rules, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Because then you can get away with all sorts of shit. So again, the way that he's used this is nonsense. And then he goes on about two-tier policing, and he basically points out that he, as a white right-wing blah blah blah, so with certain views gets treated one way, and those Black Lives Matter, those Just Stop Oil, they get preferential treatment. And he shows the Colston statue being shoved into the
Bristol.
It's just like, yeah. And he basically says that, like, so everybody gets away with it. And again, there's more facts and figures to this, but on one July event for Just Stop Oil, there were 271 arrests. Okay. The 4 people who were arrested for throwing that Colston statue in the harbour were found not guilty. But it was interesting why they were found not guilty. They were found not guilty because the statue wasn't actually damaged. This is something strange. When the city of Bristol or whoever it was paid for it, they went for a cheap version that was hollow, which was why it was so easy to break off of its mountings, actually. But what the judge decided was that essentially they were found not guilty because the statue itself wasn't damaged. And in effect, because it was taken out of the harbour and put in a museum somewhere, it became really, really popular and became like a tourist attraction. So if anything, it raised its profile. It was almost like, like the Streisand effect for this particular statue. However, these people were arrested, which goes totally against his premise. The BLM protest in June 2020 in London, there were 135 arrests. So essentially, we're about 2 minutes into this film, and the entire premise of the film has been proven to be false. There's no such thing as two-tier policing as he presents it. His concept about laws is nonsense. We don't live in a totalitarian state. We do have freedom of speech. We do have freedom of assembly, and we do have freedom of the press, which is shown by the documentary existing. And he's lied to you about why he was arrested on November the 26th. So, we're less than 5 minutes into this film, and it's pointless.
Just going off the kind of those examples, I think they're great kind of evidence that kind of Neil's presenting there. I think the way he views the world is so blinkered. Like, there's even worse examples, like talking about the environmental movement. Like, you know, the British state infiltrated the Green movement in the early 2000s under, I think it was called like the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which was people like Mark Kennedy, was an undercover policeman having relationships with women. There's a famous example of Bob Lambert, I think it was his name, had a child with a woman. So like the Green movement, the environmental movement from like 20 years ago, groups like Earth First, Reclaim the Streets, that later have kind of gone on to develop and become things like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil. They have been so persecuted, and that was 20 years ago that we're finding out about now. Can you imagine the amount of state infiltration? Like there's real conspiracies going on. So this idea that like Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion, like they don't have anything bad done against them. And even like, you know, historically, the blacklisting of trade unionists. Again, obviously, Tommy Robinson doesn't want to know anything where organised workers are persecuted by the state because it doesn't fit into like his kind of opinion. And even like another friend of mine, a guy called Jim Matthews, who wrote the book Fighting Monsters, was one of the people that actually went out to Rojava and fought with like the Kurdish. There was the YPG and the YPJ. There was people from anarchist backgrounds, people that called themselves communists, people from all different kind of political spectrums. But they actually went out and fought against, shock horror, fascist Islamists, the very thing that Tommy Robinson always talks about. The actual people that went and fought them are, you know, again, shock horror, Tommy. They're actual people that call themselves communists and left-wing and socialists. And again, when they came back, when Jim Matthews came back in 2016, like he was debanked, he was like completely persecuted for 2 years. And these are people that have gone like similar to the International Brigades of the 30s, like George Orwell, that's funnily enough quoted in this film. These are people that have gone and, you know, fought against fascism. And all these people, all these left-wing campaigns, the idea that kind of like, you know, black people or black communities, like that the police are nice to Black Lives Matter. I mean,
it's ridiculous.
Because they had like a few little clips of like some like taking a knee.
And I think this is the point. What this film does is manipulation. Like there's a whole thing where it does the stuff of like the police, like dancing at Carnival. Carnival was founded off the back of like police brutality of a community. The idea that police like at Pride wearing rainbow stuff. There's voices of criticism within Carnival and within Pride that criticise the police's involvement. You know, Pride was founded off a riot. So it's easy to kind of take examples of liberalism and kind of point at it and laugh at it. But the way he kind of puts it into this paranoid conspiracy that everything is communism, I think that's the underlying thing that links this with like the Plandemic Threes, with your Alex Joneses, with that whole kind of ilk.
There is a link definitely to that comes up later that we were very much surprised by that we will get into. I mean, the next thing that he says is that the UK is like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia and North Korea. And I thought two things, right? One, don't you like Russia? and also, which one? I mean, even in his sort of like, you know, totalitarianism, he can't help but be a bit racist and generalistic. All the foreigners are the same. They're all exactly the same. And it's like, oh dear, you poor simple-minded fool.
Just this idea of like what he's about is about British values and Britain, but never self-critical about how was Britain built as an empire, colonialism, things like this.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll never kind of look inwards at that. Again, it's just projecting. But you're so right, the way he's picked like all these foreign totalitarian states. We're kind of in chapter 1, right? This film uses these devices, and we are in two-tier policing.
Well, this is it, two-tier policing, and he immediately basically just destroys his entire point. because what he does is, as you quite rightly pointed out, he showed them dancing at carnival and interacting and kneeling for the Black Lives Matter guys, and sort of dancing and sort of getting along with sort of the pro-Palestine marchers. And then he shows a load of far-right thugs, and see if you can tell the difference, attacking the police, and he complains that they were treated differently. And the thing that immediately is that he obviously doesn't talk about, but is like apparent even from the sort of like the bits of film that he's managed to show, is like, well, the difference is violence, isn't it? Right? These people were protesting peacefully, right? And we know that some people weren't because they were arrested. Obviously, in any protest, someone gets a bit leery, someone does something silly that they regret, okay? But even in the examples that he shows, the people that he opposes, they're protesting peacefully. And the people that he supports are protesting violently. And he says, you know, you can climb on statues, you can block the street, you can glue yourself to the road. And it's like, well, yes, but the difference is violence. You are allowed to protest. Like, he's just complained that we're becoming a totalitarian state like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and North Korea. What is it about those things that they really don't like? Well, it's protest against the government, isn't it? And he's just established that he's not for that. So he must be for protest against the government. We know this because he's made a film about protesting against the government and does protests against the government. It's almost as if he just doesn't like certain things, that there's not really a sort of a sort of moral or ideological sort of argument that he's going. He's just saying, I don't like these people. But obviously that would mean that he was a thick racist twat. And so I don't know where to go with that thought.
Just coming off that, it's again in this kind of chapter, once he's established this whole thing about two-tier policing, this whole thing of like agitators. He then uses this example of someone on their doorstep shouting at a Palestinian demo.
Yeah.
And like, again, provoking, like, and again, you know, I don't want to kind of champion the police, but of course, like, it would be sensible for them to tell the person, stop doing that, because like you are potentially going to create a really explosive situation. And this keeps happening. There's later Charlie Veach clip of someone getting arrested waving a Union Jack. But again, all the context is taken out. Like, again, this is meant to be a film about propaganda, but this is all manipulation in this film.
I actually took the time to look into why all of those people were arrested, and can you believe? And I found every single one of them. And can you believe that the film hasn't really represented the facts fully? Like, I mean, again, the first one is the bloke on the stairs, as you say, like, and they say, like, in his own house, but he's not in his own house. He's on the street shouting and inciting a mob, which that's against the law. Now, if you think that law is unjust, fine, make a film about that. And then they make a huge deal about From the River to the Sea being racist. And it simply isn't. I mean, there are certain people that, let's not muck about, there are actually some Palestinian groups that have used it as a sort of dog whistle for the eradication of the Israeli state. And there are some Israelis that will tell you that that is how it is exclusively used and that they find it offensive. And that may well be the case that they do find it offensive. But what is not true is that is exclusively how that is used. It's ironic that later on they sort of moan about, like, oh, you can't use the British flag or the Union Jack or anything like that because people say that it's been appropriated by racists. And they're making the exact same criticism about something like From the River to the Sea. You know, it just shows that their arguments are very, very shallow. It then shows Gideon Falter. And there was a big furore because one of the policemen said, you clearly look Jewish, and he took that to be anti-Semitic. And then a video came out which showed the broader concept, which is this guy has got a huge security team. He's a YouTuber. He's going around trying to instigate some sort of like argument. And the policeman was very, very fair, and it was explaining the reasons that he can't go across the road because I think he was wearing a yarmulke. And he'd been shouting, like, you know, pro-Israeli slogans. He was there to cause trouble. And so, again, the film misrepresents exactly why. And then it brings on an ex-cop called Harry Miller, who was investigated for transphobic tweets, and he's basically saying that From the Rivers of the Sea is racist, which isn't. I don't really know much about this guy, Harry Miller, except that he seems quite unpleasant. And now, in fairness to him, his views I find abhorrent, but there is actually a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of sort of in his story, which we'll come on to later. Like, okay, but yeah, he turns up. And then all these other sort of talking heads turn up. Peter McClive and whoever. He's ex-UKIP, and he's also basically saying from the river to the sea. Yeah, and he's in this group called Hearts of Oak, which is a racist group that basically sort of focuses on Muslim rape gangs. And it's also got a bloke called Dr. Niall McCrae who writes for the Daily Skeptic. Ooh, and he's also been in the Bruges group to write about cultural Marxism and Soros, the puppet master, and the Great Replacement. And the Bruges group is loosely connected to sort of like Coke money, essentially. Not cocaine. Coke Industries.
Brothers.
Coke Industries.
Yes, which is, very, very big business, dark money, which is interesting that like that sort of thing is washing through this anti-establishment documentary.
I mean, I found the whole, like, this film's obviously all about him, but you mentioned kind of earlier, like all these people that are in it. And some I didn't recognize, but obviously there's your classic, there's Calvin Robinson, Katie Hopkins. One of the things I found really, really interesting was the way it actually used the clip of Suella Braverman, who's obviously the former Home Secretary and very easily to criticize some of her, policies, etc., etc. It was really interesting because, like, she obviously wasn't a guest on the film. They didn't interview her, but it's edited in to almost seem like her talking head follows literally off the back of Calvin Robinson. And I think it's really interesting because they bring her back later, and they bring back Lee Anderson as well. And what it does is it uses these clips of other people to almost legitimize their point and take them from just being these fringe people, Katie Hopkins, Calvin Robinson, etc. And this is the thing about Tommy Robinson. Like, his form of populism is actually cut from the cloth of the mainstream. He's actually the magnification of, like, the racist policies of the state under people like Suella Braverman. Like, his Islamophobia, his anti-immigrant hatred and racism is drawn from the newspapers, it's drawn from the media outlets, it's drawn from the commentators and policies like of the state, like that he claims to be against. So I just think it's really interesting. He puts himself up as almost being this revolutionary, but actually his stuff is like, he's just a magnification. He wants to take it even further right, even further extreme.
And he was employed by Quilliam, which is a government think tank, what was it, the Middle East Forum, and Rebel Media. It's laughable. He gets a huge amount of press and such like that. There's a machine behind him that his anti-establishment credentials just simply aren't there. Like, you could even, there's a conspiracy theory, like, that you could take it even further, that essentially he was a football thug that was, tapped up by the security services, and this is why he had a passport under the name of Paul Harris, and has also gone by the name of Stephen McMaster. And it's not entirely clear what his true identity is. And there was a very strange scenario where essentially he went to America and he went on his friend's passport, but when the case came to England, the judge found his apparent real passport, which was under the name Paul Harris. So we know that Tommy Robinson isn't his real name, but he claims that Stephen actually Lennon is his real name, but he's got at least two other names. Whether these were false passports or whether that's his actual true identity has never been cleared up. But it's certainly cagey.
you touch upon such a brilliant point, Neil. Because like while we're talking about conspiracies, like when we're talking about the very far, like extremist fringes and certainly the far right, it is awash with like police infiltration, between people like dobbing on each other with state infiltration. I mean, there's loads of actual real conspiracies. Things like Combat 18 has been accused of being like a state honey trap, stuff like that. So.
And connected to union and terrorism in Ireland and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, there's loads of real conspiracies. But again, it's like Tommy Robinson, I'm starting to question whether he is actually a journalist because he doesn't seem to have any integrity, any research, or really look at evidence in a rational way.
I mean, if he's a journalist, what publications does he actually work for? I mean, I would suggest he's a propagandist, but not a journalist.
Let's jump back into like the collection of people, because also this is in the moment of film where there's much more talking heads. So I've mentioned there was Katie Hopkins. Neil, you cracked me up because I thought exactly the same thing. Neil texted me, or text the group chat, I should say. And the moment Lawrence Fox appeared, I actually felt bad for the guy. And
I smelled him.
That's really difficult. He looks so hungover.
Doesn't he? He looks like he's fucking dying. He looks like me when I'm coming home from a festival. Like Jesus Christ, honestly.
He looks like those pictures that he posts after he's been out for a jog.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he looked like.
Yeah.
The guy looked like he was on either a come down or just really hungover, and probably just like was kicking himself that the interview had been booked for that morning and he couldn't get out of it. And then we had like Carl Benjamin, like
Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah, for me, he just came across as like a Poundland Jordan Peterson. And
fat Yorkshire Ripper.
Yeah, I felt like this is like, is this what dumb people think an intelligent person sounds like?
That sums him up perfectly.
Yeah.
The way he said, "our lad Tommy," it just made me think of that meme with Steve Buscemi wearing a backwards baseball cap and a skateboard, where he's like going, "Hello, fellow young people." It's like Carl Benjamin's trying to be like down with like the proletariat by calling him our lad Tommy. So it's such a weird bunch of people that he's assembled for this film.
Carl Benjamin, like, I mean, aside from the fact that he's made some very questionable like statements about age of consent, that he's desperately tried to walk back, but not convincingly. The most embarrassing thing that ever happened to Carl Benjamin was when he not being milkshake, not having shit thrown at him, not failing like as a politician, not failing as a human being even. But when he said that I wouldn't even rape Jess Phillips, and he thought that it was a flex to phone his mum on his live stream and say, if I said that I wouldn't rape somebody, was that a good thing or a bad thing? So it's like, you pussy, you lied to your mum about something that you did, where essentially, you used essentially tacitly the threat of rape against a woman, and like, no, I wouldn't even do that to you, you're worthless. And you lied to your mum about it and tried to present that as a flex. That's so pathetic.
It sounds like a disgusting human being.
He's an incredibly disgusting human being. He's like a slug with a beard. Then Calvin Robinson turns up as well, and basically he says that this is the thing that gets on my tits, right? It's very unfair that they smear and label me and Tommy as far right. It's like, but you are. And I'm not even using that as a pejorative. You openly say that your politics involve essentially Christian fascism. Like you're opposed to LGBT people, immigration, large government, you're anti-abortion, you propose harsh policing on certain things and low regulation. And you've criticised the government for not being conservative enough. How else would you describe yourself? Seriously, how else would you describe yourself? And I don't understand this. Well, I do understand it, right? Because it's like they don't want to be associated with the far right because Hitler. And if that's the thing that's embarrassing you, maybe you're wrong. maybe it's a stupid position to have. Maybe you're a dick. Who knows? Like, but that's the thing, and it makes absolutely no sense.
Tommy Robinson has kind of like, pioneered that whole thing of trying to rebrand the far right as not being fascism. And again, that was the whole thing, in the intro.
Common sense.
Yeah, like he wants to actually distance himself from those old British fascists and wants to put himself as the common sense man. And for me, this whole film seemed like the equivalent, again, sorry to use memes as a reference, but the whole ban the poppy meme, that always gets shared every year, that's always fake. Like that just seemed like what Calvin Robinson and all these people are just whinging about, like we can't fly the St. George's Cross.
Well, this is, yeah, exactly. And then basically Harry Miller, that policeman who seems terribly unpleasant, comes on and says that the St. George's flag is seen as racist, but the Palestine flag isn't. And it's like, you really can't blame the Palestinians for that. You could probably blame the BNP and the National Front and various other racist groups that use that ideology, that iconography, in order to advance their cause and to give an impression and an idea of Englishness that is xenophobic and racist. So blame them. You're a bit like basically some sort of charmy in India going, no, it's fine, swastikas are cool. And it's like, I'm ever so sorry, but that other guy's marketing was better than yours. And now that symbol is now forever tainted. Don't blame the symbol. Don't blame society. Blame that guy. Right. And it's the same thing. It reminds me of that old gag. It's like, I've worked in the post office for 30 years. Do they call me Post Office Joe? No. You fuck one dog and I'm Dog Fucker Joe. And it's like, yes, that's how things work. So you can't complain. And then they compound this stupid fucking argument by showing loads of people with flags, after saying you can't even wave these flags. With flags, with police going up and literally saying, yeah, you're fine to wave the flags, but please don't say anything racist. Literally saying you can use the flags, just don't say anything racist. And they go, see, that's outrageous. They don't even go up to those Palestinians waving flags, saying, I don't think they've said anything racist. Which goes again against this whole concept of totalitarianism, because they've seen you doing something that they disagree with, and they've given you a warning. And then allowed you to wave these flags, which you claim shows two-tier policing. And going back to that concept, the examples that he gave was, you can't wave a Union Jack. And he shows a man being cuffed up, covered in a Union Jack. Can you believe he didn't tell the entire story? You see, that was on South John Street in Liverpool. And the man wasn't arrested for waving Union Jack. He just happened to be wearing a Union Jack. He was arrested for continually shouting homophobic and racist abuse. That's why he was arrested. So nothing to do with it. And then he shows the guy, you could be arrested for preaching the gospel. And this was in Uxbridge, and this was this year. And I looked into it, and the man was arrested for shouting at people that he thought was gay that they were going to go to hell. Continually. Causing a nuisance. So not for preaching the gospel, or I suppose in very loose terms, like preaching the gospel. So that's it. And then, so these are the examples that he used. And then the other example was the bloke shouting on his doorstep, which they totally misrepresented. And again, this is my notes. It's like, they then show people with UK flags being asked not to be racist and not to stand on barriers. But then they are told that, yes, of course you can use your flag and wave it. I thought this was supposed to show that you can't have flags. This is a fucking shit documentary.
At the risk of sounding a little bit too far left, or maybe even a little bit conspiratorial.
Kill the king?
I do think there is a two-tier policing.
Yes.
But it's not with what they're talking about.
No!
It's the elites versus the people.
Well, in which case there's three-tier policing, because it's the elites, the people, and then poor people who just so happen to be people of colour quite a lot.
Yeah.
And so. But never in my life have I sat around in England and thought, you know, who's most at risk from police brutality and like, you know, the system really having a go at them? The straight white male. Never once. No, never once. Like, you know, like it's ridiculous.
And again, this is like, this film doesn't set up to honestly explore the police and corruption within the police. You could easily do a film about the history of the police. You know, they were constructed as, you know, built off colonialism. They're a tool of like the property class. When the police were founded, communities were always kind of persecuted and controlled. They're loyal to the property and ruling class. You could easily make a decent historical analysis of where the police ideologically are loyal to. And that would be obviously with the state and the people in power. But that's not what Tommy Robinson isn't doing. He's not making a film that looks at institutional racism, homophobia, how they treat women. Like, that's not what he's exploring in this film, right?
He's the target, apparently. Right? None of that happens, right? Okay. He's never, like, the thing is, like, so when was the last time you were beaten up by coppers? It's never fucking happened, right? Okay. I know gay guys that have been beaten up by coppers. I know black guys that have been beaten up by coppers. I know Asian guys that have been beaten up by coppers for very, very, like, you know, poor reasons. Sometimes no reason at all. Or there were reasons, obviously, but no justifiable ones. That's never happened to Tommy Robinson. What's happened is he's got arrested and jailed for things that he did. And then he's crying about it and asking people for fucking money. Like, case in point, which I'm sure you do, probably know more about this than me, this where he claims, I wasn't allowed to march in Tower Hamlets. I was marching for a dying child. Fuck off, were you?
I mean, look, we're going to get there. But I just want to make one point about how, because, you know, I think this film is all about manipulation, and he's often trying to smear pro-Palestine campaigns, make people look really bad that are the alternative to Tommy's politics. But one thing that I think we shouldn't deny as well is, and again, it's used purely exploitative, is that at times he does use extreme Islamist groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir are used in it. He's used people on like pro-Palestine demos. And again, I really wanted to include that fact at the start that actually he was founded off the back of responding to al-Mujahirun. But there's a symbiotic relationship between Tommy, the white far right, and almost like the Islamic far right. And actually, these are very small groups, and they themselves, Hizb ut-Tahrir, they make a name off turning up 5 of them and picketing a bigger mosque and creating conflict. They use exactly the same political strategy as Tommy Robinson and everyone else. And there is a symbiotic relationship. He uses them, clips of them, to like for his own argument.
Speaking of al-Mujahirun, here's a fun fact. I was threatened by them at a protest.
But yeah.
Wow.
If you go to YouTube and you type in, you know, Brent Lee, We Are Strange, there's me doing a spoken word bit outside of 10 Downing Street, and we're at a One Law for All protest. And the One Law for All like protest was organized to bring light to some underground Sharia courts that were operating inside the country. So I was there. I was asked if I would go speak there because like my collective, the anti-injustice movement, had been invited to like, you know, make up the numbers basically. So we were there. And then to our right, there were the police. And then to the right of them was al-Mujahirun. So they were counter-protesting us. And I was standing there doing my rapping and that through a big, massive megaphone. And I'm like looking over at them. And there's this massive dude. He's like as tall as me, but he's like twice the size of me. He's staring right at me, and he just like drags his thumb across his neck, looking at me like he's going to behead me. I'm like, I'm just rapping like at him. It's just, It's the funniest thing. Like,
that might have been a thumbs up. You might have been like, I really like this. You sick bars, bruv. Like
bars.
But exactly, bars.
No, it definitely was. But this is the really cool thing about the whole thing, and quite interesting about like what's also portrayed in this film is both sides of us were there protesting, somewhat peacefully. We weren't fighting or anything. The police was between us, keeping everyone calm. But later in the afternoon, across the street, the EDL turned up. Oh. They came in and started kicking off, throwing shit, and they tried to join our group, but our group was like, no, fuck off, you're fascists. Like, you got nothing to do with us. So we kind of pushed them all away, and they started kicking off with everyone, and the police came in and got rid of them because generally counter protests are the one that are broken up, because counter protests are there to agitate the actual protest that's really going on. So the police see that as something that they should really probably shut down. If they want to keep the peace between everything, they allow the normal protest to go on and they get rid of the counter protest. Tommy and his thugs are generally the counter protest to peaceful protests, as we'll see like throughout this whole film.
Yeah, I mean, the constantly, and this kind of actually perfectly leads us onto this Tower Hamlets clip that he uses. He provokes, like he absolutely knows what he's doing. So this was a really funny moment in this film, which I kind of text you guys about with images to as evidence. So in the film, Tommy and Kevin Carroll, I think this was in about 2013, they had what was claimed as like a charity walk. They had these 2 T-shirts on, and they just wanted to walk into Tower Hamlets as a borough because there'd been this constant over the last few years provocation. And again, Tommy was doing it to provoke a lot of the young youth, predominantly Bengali, Muslim, in Tower Hamlets, because again, that makes great headlines and it's great for his agenda. What's really ironic in this film, that they use this clip, they don't actually show when Tommy gets punched. They show when Kev Carroll gets punched. And in this clip, he says that these 2 guys, he believes, were undercover police officers used to actually provoke him. The funny thing is, I know these 2 people. I should say hypothetically, I know these 2 people. Hypothetically, one of them is in one of my films. That's how well I know one of these people. Hypothetically, this person that I know really well, and I know isn't an undercover copper because I know him well, he's been in my film. The person that hypothetically assaulted Tommy Robinson is actually an Irish Republican communist. And the irony here is Tommy spends this whole film trying to find reds under the beds. He sees communism everywhere, whether they are liberals, whether they are corporations, whether they are conservatives. Like they are all communists to him. The irony is when he actually gets punched by an actual communist, he can't tell a communist if they came up and punched him
in the face.
Is the moral of the story.
He doesn't recognize the fist even when it's in his face.
Yeah. So yeah, that was that made it really, really funny for me that they especially identified these people as being undercover police officers, and I actually knew one of them was a communist. So
my understanding was that essentially he was told, "You're not allowed to come here." He's claiming that, I turned up and blah, blah, blah. No, you knew that you weren't supposed to go there. Because everyone, as you quite rightly said, Greg, what he hoped was, I hope some black lads throw some shit at me or try it on or whatever. Ironically, he's punched by some white guys. But yeah, so he's lying and he's exploiting a dying child.
Yeah, he knows no bounds, his level of grifting, and his whole career has been, this guy is a chameleon, and now with this film, he's literally just furthering the grift. he's furthered it into the world of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, absolutely. The next bit that he does is he tries to say, and I was also arrested at Speaker's Corner on a fabricated charge of carrying an offensive weapon. And he shows the video, and at no point do I hear anyone say anything about an offensive weapon. They arrest him because he's the organizer of a large gathering during the COVID lockdown. And you can tell that's happening because that's what they tell him at the time. And they're all wearing masks. And that's what was on the charge sheet and everything. But I strongly suspect that, I mean, I don't know because I wasn't there, but it smacks of fabrication. They claimed that I had an offensive weapon and blah, 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 and then changed it to this other lesser charge. How Kafkaesque, although he doesn't reference Kafka because he's thick.
Just before we move on to the next chapter, I just also, we've not mentioned that one of the faces that is interviewed is Andrew Bridgen, and while Lawrence Fox looked hungover, Andrew looked like just really happy to have booked a gig, and that someone was listening to me. He looked really pleased, bless him. When I saw, I felt really, he had an audience for once.
To be fair, the next line, and I'll show you this, is, oh look, Andrew Bridgen turns up, the fat lying cunt. so it hadn't gone unnoticed, no. But he turns up and says something sort of ridiculous, and then something really, really horrible happens. Harry Miller, previously investigated for transphobic remarks on Twitter, he says that, and this is the fucking lack of self-awareness, showing rainbow shows political affiliation of cops, and this is a bad thing. The fucking irony. As if we don't know your political affiliation. Does he really think that but then he says, if you have a police car, there's a rainbow, we know which side of the political divide they're on. Which shows that he's on the opposite of this imagined political divide. And this imagined political divide that he is offended by is pride, which is the concept that people who happen to be homosexual, bisexual, transgender, or in any way are sort of exotic in their sexuality should be allowed to live. And he has set himself up as in opposition to that, which is an interesting take that basically this ex-copper in this Tommy Robinson film has essentially, by his own words, said that he is on the political divide that it implies wants to eradicate gay people. And at that point I thought, fuck these people. Fuck these people in the fucking ear. I hate these people. Absolutely dreadful.
Then we kind of get motoring through to, I guess, chapter 2.
The politicized judiciary. Dun.
So it's just building on this idea of the two-tiered police is now the two-tiered judiciary. And is all, again, built around him, right? Is this 2018, him being arrested filming outside a Leeds Crown Court, outside a grooming gang case, and being found for contempt, etc. And again, he just shows himself the showman he is when he's talking to this journalist, and he's like, I'm convicted of journalism. Everything, again, is always about this guy being
He's conflicted in journalism. At the very best. The thing that initially struck me when it's the politicized judiciary, it's are you fucking serious? The government's been right-wing for the last 14 years.
Yeah.
And increasingly further right-wing. The very idea that, the government has sat there, going, the person that is really a threat to what we want to achieve by sending asylum seekers to Rwanda to die, is Tommy Robinson. That's who we need to attack to stop us, to allow us to do our evil deeds, because he's just getting in the way of it, isn't he? With his sort of pro-white shit and his silly mythic past nationalism and stuff like that. There's no way that we can tie that into what we're talking about. Oh, no, wait. No, Suella Braverman was in the fucking film, right? So, oh no, it's almost as if it's all over the place, this shit. Like, it's ridiculous.
Suella Braverman, Lee Anderson, and Andrew Bridgen.
Yes.
But they're not right wing enough for Tommy Robinson, which tells you how right wing he is. He sees them as he sees them as literal communists. But, it's just not right wing enough. He wants to take it much, much further to the extremes, which tells you everything about the man. About 27 minutes into the film, finally he quotes Robert Kennedy Jr. And I was just when this came up, I was like, wow, this is where we are now. This is this is the real cross-pollination of like openly right-wing politics with anti-vax kind of conspiracism.
Oh, ridiculous as well. And also, the quote that he brings up is ridiculous. He says, there's been no time in history where the people censoring free speech were the good guys. I'm like, yes, there is. People censoring things like eugenics or people promoting slavery is the concept that we should teach in schools that black people are 3/5 of human beings. I would suggest that censoring that would be the good guys. Censoring lies and propaganda. Censoring stochastic terrorism. And I think that even Tommy Robinson would agree with this one. I'm sure he would like to shut down certain preachers in certain mosques and such like that because he feels that they are preaching something that is detrimental. So again, by his own standards, his argument is bullshit. I'd suggest that censoring slander would be the good guys. I'd suggest that censoring practices like conmen, shady business tactics, Wolf of Wall Street type things, making things where people can con you by using their words and destroy your life, I suggest that censoring that would make you a good guy. I'd even go so far as to say suggesting media corporations from lying or from promoting certain products knowing that they are harmful to people. I would suggest that censoring that would put you on the side of the good guys. But the problem is that if all that is true, which it is, that would mean that RFK Jr. is an idiot.
Who knew?
Now that
exactly
is a clip.
Yeah. I loved in this next bit, okay, he starts talking about the online safety bill and, how it's going to be used and weaponized by anyone that is offended. And Tommy then lists the people that would weaponize it and use it against them. And it's almost a comedy moment. He's like, the drag queens, the Muslims, the women. It's like, oh my God, this is like, it's hilarious.
The thing that interested me about that particular thing was he says the drag queens, the men who get sexually aroused by dressing up as women and reading to children. And it's like, why does your mind go there?
Yeah.
Like, that's his baseline. That's where he's understood, well, the only reason that you dress up as a woman is for some sort of sexual thing. And it goes without saying that if you're doing a sexual thing in front of children, well, QED. And it's like, no, that's how your brain works. That means that if we somehow trick Tommy Robinson into some high heels and threw him in a fucking primary school, God knows what would happen. Like, is that really what he's saying? Like, because that seems like a very, very thin argument. But yeah, this concept that the online safety bill could be weaponized, again, it did seem like, because there are legitimate concerns about these types of legislation, but it just seemed, he didn't explain in any way why. He just said, I won't be able to say what I want to say. It's like, well, what is it you want to say? Like, seriously, I mean, again, you're making a film. Like, you're making a film. Like, you can say whatever you want to say. Is it because what you want to say is unpalatable and, like, you actually want to avoid criticism? Because that's what it sounds like.
And again, like, Tommy's politics, populist politics, and conspiracy politics, if you will, a lot of that is always based on kernels of truth. Like, there's elements within it. Like, of course, the police can be corrupt. heavy-handed and unlawful. But, you know, he's not exploring truth. He's not holding things up to like journalistic integrity. This is just like, I've refused to use the word documentary for this because it is not a documentary.
No, it's propaganda.
It's a propaganda film. This whole bit ends with like a slow zoom and a dramatic music on Carl Benjamin. It's like just so manipulative and just so obvious. It's terrible.
That's the view that I have. Like, anyway, but like going back to your point of like,
allegedly,
like, anyway, like, so he uses several examples to highlight the point that you've just made. Like, and the first one is like Sam Mallier, and it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, you're really going to use Sam Mallier? Sam Mallier, for people that don't know, he says he was in prison for putting stickers up. But the saying that immigration destroyed Great Britain, he's like, no, fuck, he wasn't. He was like, that was some of the stickers. The stickers that he actually put up were ridiculously, horribly racist. And like, you know, so he was imprisoned for hate crimes. Like, and people always say that, like, and InfoWars and loads of other people have done this. Like, oh, he only put stickers up. It's not about the stickers so much as what the stickers said. And the stickers were designed to be incredibly hateful. Like, it's like, I only put a flag up. It was a fucking Nazi flag. Like, you know, that's the thing. It's ridiculous. He then shows Kevin Cretin, who says all he did was leave a bacon sandwich outside a mosque and he died in jail. And it's like, well, it's very sad that he died in jail, but the fact that he died in jail is neither here nor there. Like, he's trying to imply that he was killed by the authorities or something nefarious happened. It's not what happened at all. And he wasn't jailed just for leaving the bacon sandwiches outside the mosque. He also stood outside, pissed up with some friends, racially abusing people going into the mosque and physically threatening somebody who worked there. And he also lies for no good reason in the documentary. He says he got 2 years for this, and he got 1 year. Now, whether that's down to trying to hype things up or just being poor at research, I've got no idea, but it shows you. And it says, in contrast, 3 women were convicted of terror charges and were not even fined. Like, and the terror charges that they were convicted of was they wore stickers that had pictures of paragliders to a pro-Palestine march. Is that a bit childish? Is it offensive? Yeah, probably. But he's trying to frame it that they, like, you know, put a bomb somewhere or something like that. And they each got a 12-month conditional discharge for being suspended sentence. So, you know, they were punished. So again, his argument falls flat. Oh, they weren't punished and that guy was punished. Well, they were all punished. But his thing was more severe, so he was punished more severely. Also, to be fair, we don't know what his background was. I haven't bothered to look into whether he had a criminal record or whatever, so there could be other circumstances that explain the longer sentence or whatnot. He then shows the Muslim who raped a 13-year-old and was let off because he didn't know that it was illegal. And this has been used all the time by the far right, and it's a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened. It wasn't rape in the sense of violent rape. It was statutory rape. This lad who was, he was 18. And so to my mind, he shouldn't have been messing around with a girl that young, but he came from a foreign country and he didn't know the law. He claims he didn't know that the girl was underage, and it was all totally consensual. So the rape part comes from the statutory rape concept of it. And that's probably right. Was it probably a bit lenient? Yeah, potentially. But it's one of these things where, like, realistically, what would being harsher have done? And it's been totally mischaracterized by Tommy in this documentary. He then shows Newcastle grooming gang rapist let off. Again, the lad was 15 and he was intellectually subnormal to the point where basically, like, he really didn't know what was going on. It doesn't excuse what he did, but he was basically goaded into doing it by other people who got very, very long sentences for these crimes. So again, that goes against this concept that everyone gets away with it. It really just doesn't work. And he says that his 2018 imprisonment was unfair based on flawed procedure, which is kind of fair because it was. Technically, what happened when he got arrested in 2018, there was a technicality in the trial that meant that he was afforded a release and a release from jail. But the problem was that basically he was later retried and found guilty again. And what he did was he basically turned up at the end of a trial and breached the court conditions to try and make the whole thing about himself and nearly caused the destruction of a case against people that had done harm to children, which is the one thing that he claims to champion, which basically just goes to show that he's nothing but a grotty grifter that will attach himself to something as horrific as a child sex case in order to get himself cachet in his world. And it's just despicable. It's just, it's base and shows a distinct lack of caring for the things that he claims to be his raison d'etre. He won't like that for several reasons. One, because he's honest, and two, because raison d'etre sounds foreign.
I think you're absolutely spot on, though, with your analysis there, Neil. And it was great just to hear some of those clips that are so inflammatory, or examples just explained and given context. And I really struggle with how people can take this guy so seriously, because everything is about his ego, is about himself, and is lining his own pockets ultimately. Yeah,
totally. He then moans about his more recent arrest, where he basically got off due to a technicality again because they put the wrong date on the paperwork. And he seems to just miss the entire point that, well, this disproves your entire documentary. If it was a totalitarian state, little details like that wouldn't matter. You wouldn't have got away with it. You got away with it. That very action disproves the entire premise and point of the entire documentary. It's just such a stupid thing. But what can you do?
And again, the truth is, the guy wants a totalitarian state, but he wants it within his political ideology. And all he's doing is pointing out moments where, like we say, there's been bad judgments have been made or police mishandling. He points out, the political system is neoliberalism. He points out where the state has overreached. Neoliberalism was meant to be the alternative between communism and fascism, to be that kind of liberal middle ground, but still had the mechanisms and tools of the state, like the police, the judiciary, etc., the media, etc. So all he's doing is criticizing, he calls it communism, but he's just criticizing liberalism, and he's just trying to take it further and further right. This guy is ultimately wanting fascism. He has a kink for domination.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's probably because he's quite small. There is something that was interesting that was actually raised completely by accident, though. That twat Constantine, whatever, the fucking guy on Twitter. He says, in Russia there's 400 arrests for saying things on social media, and in the UK there's 3,300 in the last year or whatever. Right, okay. Now there's several points to this, right? Okay. We don't know what his metric is for any of those things. It may well be true. There might be a reason for that, though. That is an interesting thing that a friend of mine who is a copper has explained is the bane of his life at the minute, right? Apparently, what happens is girl splits up with boy goes on social media, calls her a bitch or a cunt or whatever, and she, even via text, saying, I hate you, blah, 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 blah. That is malicious communications. And the police have to act on it because the evidence is there. And my friend, I won't name, was basically saying, it's a bit of a pain in the arse because you get all these lads who are just like, well, I got pissed and I got angry and blah, blah, blah. And, I did this, and now they've got a criminal record. And the police are quite keen to push these types of things because it's big CPS it's the bangs of rights. Do you know what I mean? So it looks really, really positive on their stats, etc. It looks like they're doing community policing. They can spin it in whatever way they want, right? Okay. Not to say that all of these cases are frivolous by any stretch of the imagination, but there is that. So could that, or something like that, be the explanation for this particularly high rate in the UK? Whereas in Russia, you can essentially beat your wife half to death, and because of the macho culture there, then nobody would give a shit. So, stats like this, when they're presented, they make it seem like, my God, we live in like such a totalitarian state, which is the point. But they lack so much context as to make them pointless.
It was a really weird use of statistics, I felt, that point, because I was like, does that technically make us worse? I don't know. Like, actually, could that be a good thing that like we actually investigate offenses and stuff? Like, it was a strange point that was, again, just framed through the ideology.
Yeah. The other bit that they go into, which I really can't be bothered with, because it's like that Harry Miller talks about the Allport scale of prejudice, and basically the Allport scale of prejudice is about like, how things progress, to society. And like, but he presents it in such a way that it makes it seem comical. He says, what they're saying is, if I call somebody an N-word on Monday, by Friday, I'm going to have a genocide. It's like, no, that's not what he says at all. Right? What it says is that a normalization of these types of things leads to people seeing other people as less than human, which would eventually, going through stages, justify, or at the very least sort of lessen the impact of genocide and or mass prejudice against an entire group of people. And so again, it's one of these things where what they're trying to do there is it's a number of things. They're trying to look at this loony left academia, and we all know, are you going to do a genocide on Friday? I'm not going to do a genocide on Friday. Therefore, all this book learning is rubbish, isn't it? And it's like, either they're too stupid to understand what they're doing, which I don't really believe, or they know exactly what they're doing, which is dishonest. And again, if you need to be really dishonest, like to that degree, to try and get your point across, you don't have a point.
I found that guy really over the top. He reminded me of like an angry man shouting at clouds. Just, angry at anything, and just totally. Absolutely irrational. That probably describes pretty much everyone in this film, to be honest, over the top and irrational.
Yeah. There's like an ecosystem of these sort of like, I've ruined my career, so I've got to make money by being horrific to morons and telling them that foreigners are the cause of every problem in their life. And it's like such a dismal existence. I get up in the morning and go like, what will make reasonable people hate me, which will bring me revenue? And it's like, good God. Like, particularly someone like Lawrence Fox, like, you went to RADA, and this is what you're reduced to. Like, it's soul destroying. It's soul destroying for me, and I don't even have to go through it. God knows what he's feeling.
There is definitely an ecosystem, right? Like these people kind of are in each other's films. They all kind of cross-pollinate. Like the relationship now between Tommy Robinson and Lawrence Fox, and like you're saying earlier that things like Iconic are kind of also taking on, like legitimizing Tommy Robinson. They're all kind of just keeping their own economy kind of afloat, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so by this point, we come to chapter 3, which is hostile security services. And I think at this moment in the film, it kind of like, again, referring to our group chat, Neil, you kind of lost track of some of the chapters and you refused to go back and watch them. But I realized what is happening is actually this just starts speeding up. It actually gets like the next couple of chapters are quite short. And it kind of felt like the film was getting a little bit bored of its own kind of narrative device here.
I know I was.
Yeah. They'd had all this enthusiasm at the start. It felt a bit like actually watching this film. I had all this enthusiasm at the start, and once I actually got into it, my soul had been crushed. But yeah, like this chapter is security services. And it's kind of weird. He uses the American example of the FBI and the Twitter files and talks about Elon saving Twitter. So I thought that was really interesting, the way he kind of Americanized or used a Twitter example. And then, to be fair, he then used an example of what's happened to him with, like, potentially, was it the police outside his house? Which, it could be a number of things. It could be the police. It could be the state. It could be him being slightly paranoid. I wasn't too sure on that stuff.
I do think that was slightly ironic, seeing as he's got a reputation for turning up mob-handed, trying to threaten journalists, such as Mike Stoochbury and other people, and like threatening violence to them, and stuff like that. So for him to be annoyed that there are two blokes outside in a van seemed somewhat hypocritical.
Did you have any more thoughts on chapter 3, Neil, or had you lost yourself by this point?
No, totally. So, like, the first thing was the Twitter files. Like, it showed the FBI and the Democrats were reading private messages and pressured Twitter on content. No, they fucking didn't. They didn't at all. The Twitter files was absolutely nothing. Like, all it showed was people basically on Twitter looking at certain tweets and getting requests from certain people and weighing up which was the thing. And it showed absolutely no bias at all. It was a complete load of rubbish, which is why no specifics were talked about in the actual documentary. It's become one of these things, the mythos of fucking Elon Musk, the most tragic man on the planet. And that sort of right-wing concept that they're being censored by social media or shadow banned and such like that, which is just completely not true at all. There's no evidence to show any of this at all. What people do tend to ban from social media is things that break their terms of service, and things like racism, suggesting racial violence, suggesting other types of violence, that type of thing, that tends to get banned. So when they say, like, we see this news, I was like, I was banned for my conservative views on Twitter. What, you stuff about the economics? Not those ones, no. Other ones. And it's like, oh, right, okay, right. So it's like that's the whole thing. I've been fucking so annoying. I've been banned for being racist on Twitter. Why? What happened? I was being racist. Where? On Twitter. Okay. So yeah, he claims that these secret services were listening outside of his house, and then he starts going into fucking like all the COVID stuff, doesn't he? Which is just ridiculous. Like, is that where I've missed the chapter break?
Yeah. So now we've moved into, and it's I think time and fact and reality start to blend for you at this point in the film. We then hit like chapter 4, which is controlled media. And you're absolutely right. This is then when it becomes like real heavy about lots of fear porn, about COVID. It used examples of like Boris Johnson, Edwina Curry, and Tony Blair saying something stupid, which is like shooting fish in a barrel, getting any of those people to say something stupid. I felt it then went randomly. It showed a friend of you guys, Mariana Spring, and like stuff about fact checking. But it just showed like a clip of her, which was like really almost ominous.
But this is all shorthand in the conspiracy world. Basically, what he's doing is he's throwing shit at the wall and hoping that some of it sticks. And the problem is that with certain members of the audience, it will. When he says security services, COVID, blah, 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 it will. But just to so briefly just go back, was that really chapter 3? Like, his examples of the hostile security services are the Twitter files, which was, let's not forget, not a thing, and 2 men in a van outside his fucking house. Is he mad? They could have been plumbers.
That was literally it. That was how deep the documentary went. So no wonder you lost track of the chapters. I literally think they got bored. They could have gone like, really, this actually could be quite a fascinating topic to actually explore, but they don't want to do that. It doesn't fit the agenda.
Well, you know what's really stupid is, I'll bet that fucking Tommy Robinson is followed around. He's a prominent member of a far-right organisation and a media figure and blah, blah, blah that has influence. I wouldn't be surprised at all if people were following around. And before you even go to like, you do know you've been investigated for numerous crimes as well. These could have just been sort of like, beat coppers or whatever. You know what I mean? But no, they skip over that. It's literally two blokes in a van who, let's be honest, could have been his fucking mates. I mean, I don't know. I've got no idea because it presents nothing other than him going, no, I'm not moving. What are you doing in a van? And they're claiming, but not catching it on film, that the back of the van was full of like recording equipment, which I'm not even sure is a thing outside of, detective movies from the 70s.
From the 70s and 80s. Yeah, man.
That sounded real odd. Like, again, I know the guy is a liar. As a standard, but like you say, potentially the security services absolutely would be interested in someone like Tommy Robinson, because
they were probably there to fucking pay him.
Yeah, I wouldn't be again surprised if he's probably had meetings and conversations with authorities and the state. But the whole thing about recording equipment in the back sounded really bonkers. That really sounds like more what you'd see in a bad Hollywood film, rather than the reality of like, they could just listen to your phone. Like, they don't need to be sat outside with like headphones on in the back of a van. I don't want to say that he's done a lot of cocaine in his time, but when he's coming out with stuff here, it seems like he may have done a lot of cocaine in his time. But then quickly, like, as this thing's blurred, so yeah, like we have moved into chapter 4, and he then uses this what he probably thinks is a great example is the Voice of Wales YouTube channel, who like one of what they call themselves kind of truth, kind of alternative media. There was this incident outside a vaccine centre where they were arrested. They claimed they were press, even though they're obviously wearing hoodies with like logos on for a YouTube channel. So I don't think press often walk around with logos massively on their hoodies, promoting their YouTube channels. So, yes, the police do overreact when arresting people. They raid houses. They lay conditions on people, keeping them apart. And the police have been doing that for decades against progressive, left-wing activists, but it's just an example how like the Voice of Wales and Tommy Robinson and everyone else, like a small number of people, are again creating a situation, creating conflict, and getting that viral clip. I bet the Voice of Wales YouTube channel peaked when they got this viral clip. So they just seem to be doing the same as Tommy Robinson. But I don't know, have you come across any of their work before, Neil?
Only in as much as their YouTube was subsequently removed for blatant racism, and they are mates with Patriotic Alternative, which is a neo-Nazi organisation. So
that says everything.
Yeah, and even in the footage that they showed, they're like, you were told to move over there. One of your group acted up. You acted like a twat, and you found out, like, and you knew what you were doing, like, and you tried to play it off as, oh, look at this, how heavy-handed. But you shouldn't have really been there in the first place. Like, you turned up you wished you got that footage. As you said, like, that's probably the most footage that they've ever got. It's ridiculous. And then Tommy, like, sort of segues into sort of complaining that I as a journalist was not allowed to go to this conference in London. And it's like, well, there's two reasons. You're not a journalist, and you're banned from London for acting the twat. Like, suffer the consequences of your actions. Like, stop whinging. Like, Christ, do you know what I mean? It's very whiny, this documentary. And then we have Calvin Robinson, who moans about Ofcom. Yeah. He says that Ofcom is an arm of government censorship. And it's like, it's not. If it worked for the government, it wouldn't have gone against government ministers for what they did on GB News. It would have allowed that. It didn't allow that, did that? Even though it was Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's like, this close to the Prime Minister. And yet somehow he didn't escape. It's almost as if they're a quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation in so many words. There's connections to government, of course. The funding comes from government and stuff like that. Is there like room for sort of like pressure to be put on these organisations? Like all of these organisations, like the Environment Agency, and various other sort of, agencies that are connected to government but do public services. Of course there is. But to suggest that they are an arm of government is just absolutely ludicrous.
We also had at this moment Lawrence Fox complaining about lowering standards, which I thought was quite ironic coming from him because, he has lowered many standards in his own life.
So they're looking like he's covered in his own piss.
Calm down.
Yeah, complaining about lowering standards. Jesus Christ.
You had Andrew Bridgen claiming that we're getting a biased view, which I felt was really ironic coming from him.
It's very honest.
Yeah, very revealing. Once again,
Andrew Bridgen said that journalists don't talk to me. Those who do in private say that they would be fired if they printed what I said. And he presents that as if they want to, though. It's like, no. They're trying to tell you, mate, I'd be fucking fired if I printed the fucking nonsense that comes out of your fat lying mouth, you fucking fraud. That's why journalists don't talk to you, because you're a grifter. And he's trying to frame it the second I started speaking the truth. And it's like, you didn't speak the truth. We'll come on to him later because they try and set him up as a sort of martyr later. And it's again, they've been economical with the truth, shall we say. So, yes. And there's some bloke who I don't really know called Mayor Towsey who complains that he's not treated the same as the BBC. It's like, I don't know who the fuck you are. Of course you're not treated the same as the BBC. That's like me rolling up at some sort of hoity-toity club in the centre of London and getting pissed off because they don't treat me the same as Drake. Nobody knows who you are. You're nobody. I had to Google you and I still don't know or care who you are. But yeah. There was an interesting point that they brought up next, which was that they were saying COVID is dangerous, vaccines are safe, climate change will kill us all, and this is all a fraud that was put onto us by behavioural insight. And they mentioned the nudge unit. Again, this is also just for twats who are into conspiracies to go, they've mentioned the behavioural insight unit, the nudge unit, without any actual understanding of what the behavioural insight actually did during COVID. And the things that the behavioural insight did during COVID was try to downplay the severity of COVID and to get the public against the concept of lockdown. So this was also the Haitian Treasury did this as well. But this is one of the stupid fucking things that always annoyed me. Is there was actually a conspiracy that went on, a despicable conspiracy that went on during COVID, based on their donors who didn't want landlords losing money, people not using petrol, and people not buying daily papers. It was as banal as that. We don't want people staying home under lockdown. We want people going to work. And so government policy favoured a far more loose approach to the COVID response than was recommended by scientists. And their response actually killed people. And yet the conspiracy crowd and all the right-wing twats have acted basically having to stay at home for a couple of weeks was fucking Gulag Archipelago. And instead of pretending that the whole point was to keep us locked down in perpetuity and to get us to sign up to all sort of COVID vaccines and stuff, none of which happened. And yet there is this thing which you actually prove, which is that the government were late to react and late to lock down and were early to release. They poo-pooed the concept of masks through their own so-called health advice and created this place where there was an argument. They hired people like Sunita Gupta to create an argument between Sage, who were saying we should probably take this seriously and we should probably just lock down, and people like Sunita Gupta who were pushing, and Carl Sikora and Carl Hennigan and stuff like that, who were also financed by donors of the government and the government themselves to promote this concept of, we should probably just take it on the chin, maybe even try herd immunity. Fuck the old people. Let's keep the economy going. We don't want to shut down. That was promoted by the government with a series of scientists that they knew that basically whatever happens, we've got one set of scientists saying this, we've got one set of scientists say that, we could probably say that we were misled. And they'd have probably fucking got away with it if it wasn't for the fact that Boris Johnson is such a drunken calamity that created so much drama. I mean, actually, to be fair, there's still a huge amount of things with the PPE scandal and where money went and stuff like that has not been adequately examined or punished. But again, the conspiracy crowd has missed this by a country fucking mile.
Yeah, so like this whole, I think you made some brilliant points there, Neil. So this is kind of going into chapter 5, really, which is like the indoctrinated population. Everything you said was what this part was setting up, was that, that COVID is going to kill you. It uses, rather than have a critical analysis of the government's mishandling of the pandemic, many of like the great points you actually make there, Neil, like instead it just goes right to some of like the typical conspiracy theory stuff about COVID, lockdowns, vaccines, and just uses all of that to effectively set up this idea that the media uses the far right as a boogeyman, this indoctrinated population. And I know, Brent, this was a point you kind of wanted to come in and talk about because it then goes to this clip where they I think it's from GB News, where again it's kind of downplaying the risk of the far right, and it's talking about like on the security services, 90% on the terror watch list of followers of Islam, which is like something like 40,000 points, people, and obviously links kind of terrorism with undocumented illegal immigrants flooding the country, and this whole kind of conspiracy about the government have lost control, and that this is actually the communists' old kind of playbook to call everyone kind of racist and flood the country.
Something he also says is that, besides the 90% being followers of Islam, he also says that his criticism is that the security services or someone had said that the biggest terror threat to the UK is from the far right. And he says, well, how can that be when 90% of the people are followers of Islam? And he misses the point here of it's the rising threat to the UK. Because in the year, I think it was 2016 and 2017, the percentage of offenses carried out by far right people it doubled. So that is the rising threat statistically. And to bring it back to what you said way, 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 way back at the beginning of this episode about fascist Islam, right? ISIS, Al-Qaeda is ultra-conservative. It is essentially far right. It's the same thing. It's just not white supremacist. It's Islam supremacist. So technically, even that 90% of Muslims that are on the terror watch list are far right.
There's a bit of a fetish at the minute that's been explored a bit by Knowledge Fight. Alex Jones and various other people very strangely have started going like, well, maybe the Taliban were right. They know how to treat the women and they throw gay people out of windows, which we're completely with. And so, there is that strange crossover at the minute.
I think they're jealous of like the caliphate, that they want Sharia law. They're just jealous.
This is the irony. This totalitarianism that they profess to be hating in this documentary, fuck off. You just want to be the person with your foot on the neck. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that's what they're really saying. Is that it's not that totalitarianism is bad. It's just that we're not at the top of the pyramid currently. So that's what we're actually against. They're not against totalitarianism as a concept. They just don't like to be on the receiving end of it. like, it's not even a real totalitarianism. It's nonsense. This is imagined. They haven't actually experienced it. It's all ridiculous. What's bizarre is that that's what they actually strive to achieve.
Exactly. And I just want to stress, like, just the same case where these Christo-fascists are a small section of Christianity, so is the Wahhabist style Islam.
Yeah.
It's in no way really represents the entirety of Islam. Like, Tommy constantly uses these extremists, like you've pointed out, Elma Hajarun. These are the people that they want to use. They even at some point confuse Arabic flag with the ISIS flag, you know, and it's just, they just want to use that extremist version. It's kind of funny because that's what they're saying everyone's doing about them, but they are the extremists.
Yeah, very much so. And just for fun, for whatever reason, they bring out Dr. Malhotra, that fucking moron. Like, it's quite tragic, his story, actually, like, in many ways. Like, he's one of these doctors that is opposed to medicine. And what's happened is that he's one of these people that doesn't advocate statins. He advocates high cholesterol, high fat diet, and thinks that this is the way to solve all your ills. Now, both of his parents, but definitely his father, sort of potentially took his advice. And sadly, both of them died of what appeared to be heart-related issues that may have been brought on by factors that mainstream medicine would suggest would be connected to cholesterol, regardless of his views. Anyway, initially, he made a big sort of fuss about it because obviously he's upset about the death of his father, and he blamed it on the lack of ambulance response. And it was even in the newspaper saying that if there'd been further ambulance response, like, my father wouldn't have sadly died. Shortly after this, or after this, for whatever reason, he decided the cause of his father's death wasn't the alleged late ambulance, nor the alleged poor advice that he'd given to his father, who had a known medical condition. But it wasn't any of that. It was vaccines. It was COVID vaccines, and vaccines are the things that killed him. And bizarrely, this realization sort of coincided with him becoming very sort of popular on social media with certain people that also felt that this was a profitable thing to promote. And so, anyway, he's been brought up as the expert on this film for some reason, and this is really distasteful. Okay, and I hate to have to say this, but I can't help but thinking that the use of Malhotra and the previous use of Sinucha Gupta, regardless of the terrible things that they were saying, was sprinkled in it as a, see, we're not racist. There's a foreign-looking person. And you know, it's just, honestly, the whole thing is so transparent, isn't it?
I mean, that's always cynically how Tommy Robinson's always operated. Even like at the height of the EDL, it would be like celebrating the Sikh members' involvements, or Sikh, you know, I think at one point they had a Rangers guy who was of like Pakistani heritage, who was just like, you know, a Muslim who'd become anti-Muslim, and they used to show him off. And it's very performative. And again, it's like Tommy Robinson is almost using the postmodernism and all the things he criticizes, and he uses it like a chameleon to say, I'm not racist. So he's always, he's such a cynical guy, I think. He's a grifter. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's an element of that with his choices.
Again, that tactic's not new. You know, Milo Yiannopoulos and Candace Owens and Ali Alexander and Blair White, you know, various people say, they can't be opposed to entire people because this one person they sort of tolerate when it's useful or profitable to them, which proves that they're not bigots. And it's like, Jesus. But hey ho. Then they said the one thing that he says was like, they keep going on about this, like, they start talking about this stupid shit, illegal immigrants and what. We don't know how many of these illegal immigrants are terrorists. It's like, well, logically, that means that you don't know how many of these illegal immigrants are terrorists. they might all be doctors.
Yep.
So, you just feel a bit hysterical there, aren't you? And also, if they're illegal, you don't know how many there are. If in the concept that they've escaped into society, you can't possibly know because they're not on any charts. So this is it. And this is the point in the documentary. And again, this may well be when I miss the next chapter, when gangster Edward Griffin turns the fuck up. Like, but like, the problem is that what does he say? He's like, this is not the right thing for them to use. Anybody that's got any knowledge of G. Edward Griffin or the John Birch Society, like, the fucking G. Edward Griffin saying, communists label us as fascists, Nazis, or anti-Semitic, right? And portraying this as if, that means that anybody that's labelled as fascist, Nazis, or anti-Semitic probably isn't. Sorry, some communist plot. Probably some communist world plot. That's sort of the deal of the John Birch Society. They were very into this concept, and they were the founding sort of a lot of New World Order and Illuminati conspiracy theories. They felt that there was a communist plot to take over the entire world, to the point where they even thought that President Eisenhower was a secret communist. And they've been accused of racism, anti-Semitism. They were definitely opposed to the civil rights movement. They have a very white nationalist bent, or have in the past, and have been connected to people such as Rilo P. Oliver and Alec Butler, and others who were sort of openly anti-Semitic. JBS has in the past supported white nationalism. And Alex Jones got all of his sort of like concepts and ideas from the John Birch Society. So Edward G. Griffin saying that communist labelers as fascist, Nazis, or anti-Semitic. They were also not fans of the homosexuals as well. So, if the cap fits. Now, Alex Jones and various other people will tell you, well, that's not really true, is it? Like, what happened actually was that the ADL had Jews, because he wants to stress that in no way is he or the John Birch Society racist or anti-Semitic. So what he says is, in the instances of anti-Semitism, it was the ADL, those scurrilous sods. They were infiltrating and pretending to be John Birch members, but actually were secret Jews, infiltrating this organization in many ways, to use their own sort of phrases, poisoning it from the inside, and using that to be anti-Semitic themselves and to pretend that this organization was anti-Semitic. Now, a lot of you might be saying, but Neil, that's identical to numerous anti-Semitic canards. It is, isn't it? How we will square that circle, I don't know. Because Alex Jones says that the John Birch Society wasn't anti-Semitic. It was actually tricky Jews secretly plotting to make them look anti-Semitic in order to gain sympathy and further their Jewish, sometimes communist cause. It wasn't the John Birch Society. So, where we all fall on that, who's to say? But anyway, that's in the film to make a point, and then we're on to chapter 6. So yeah, that's where I missed 4 and 5. What was chapter 6 called? I can't remember. I didn't write it down.
Chapter 6. So we've gone from indoctrinated population of chapter 5 into mobilized masses of chapter 6. And this is when he, Tommy ironically starts talking about citizens turning on each other, talks about echo chambers, polarization, all things that, he himself has done and exists within. He talks about lonely individuals in jobs that they don't like. And, he started again making maybe some quite pertinent points. I found this really weird at this moment because, like, he takes it to be about, people. Oh, yeah, he uses clips of people overreacting during the pandemic. Again, easily, stuff that you can easily do. He links this whole kind of polarization with like lockdowns. There's a slip of the mask, and he really reveals his politics. Because he turns it now to being about the people coming out and clapping for the NHS. And he says, despite their appointments and treatments being cancelled. And he's trying to, like, it's not the fact that there is like this pandemic that's unfolding. Like, he's basically blaming the workers, the nurses, the staff, these people that the population are coming out and applauding. So it's really interesting that something that came out of the pandemic was like this moment of solidarity or mutual aid where the population actually celebrated public sector workers. And deep down, Tommy Robinson is actually, even though he claims to kind of be this voice of the working class, he's deeply anti-worker. He's deeply anti any workers that organise. And he really shows his hatred of public sector workers and the NHS staff, and the fact he sides with this anti-NHS sentiment that somehow it's like the nurses, they've cancelled all the treatments, the surgeries. Like, again, his anti-NHS sentiment just goes hand in hand with like the privatization agenda. So yeah, Tommy Robinson, anything like trade unions, strikes, any time that workers try and organise, he just really reveals his kind of fascist tendencies, if you will. But yeah, I mean, this all goes into a whole rant about, blaming people that believe in COVID, that everyone's been brainwashed. And he even says they crave a master. They want to be told what to do, and they see forcing others to comply as their virtue. And I thought,
the fucking irony.
Yeah, you're talking about yourself again, Tommy. So, and again, this whole chapter just kind of like basically comes to the conclusion that the government, again, are letting Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion and even things like Black Lives Matter, it's allowing them to do that, which is just preposterous.
Yeah, totally. Like, he goes on for the whole sort of like, they got people to turn on those who wouldn't comply, and like the destabilizing effects of the ever-changing COVID rules. And it's like, oh, don't be such a fucking wet ponce. Like, and no, they didn't get people to turn on those that wouldn't comply. Some people just acted like entitled babies and just couldn't, like, somehow manage to turn a global pandemic into a psychodrama about themselves rather than just get on with it.
And again, this is where he starts playing a lot of American clips. Is he trying to cross the pond a little bit, do you think, by using those clips? Or is there just not enough good English clips for him to use?
Well, I think he's just trying to throw shit as far as it was, like, spread. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and also, like, he's playing up again to the tropes of the conspiracy crowd. He knows what he's doing. Like, or he kind of knows what he's doing. He's semi-lazy, isn't it? Like, he's just gone, like, well, this'll appeal, basically. Right?
Yeah, I mean, he does this, like, really easy technique of just, like, a montage of, like, stumping people on demonstrations. And, some people obviously refusing to engage with talking to cameras. Some people, maybe not as confident. And the way it's just cut together is like, and to be honest, it's also done against Tommy Robinson and done against people that support and come to some of his demonstrations. And it's kind of like low-level of culture wars. They're so easy to do. And he kind of then raises this point about how some causes are more popular, that people aren't, marching for the Yemeni Muslims or, the Syrian Muslims against Assad. Like, and again, this is like a man who turned up to like a Balenciaga shop to protest it because of the viral campaign that they were secretly paedophiles. So he's someone himself who jumps from one thing that's popular to another, and it just uses the same techniques that can be said to be used against him.
Also, like most things in this film, it's bollocks. Because, and this took me 5 minutes, so there's probably more than this, but we didn't protest for the Uyghurs in China. Oh, except in 2021, when the Stand for Uyghurs march happened and thousands of people marched in London. Or in 2023, when the march was so great that it actually stopped the Chinese government from visiting. And we didn't march for the Yemeni Muslims, except in 2020, and numerous marches after that. And we didn't march for the Muslims killed by Assad, except for 2011, and 2012, and 2013, and 2015. And he's absolutely right. Nobody knows what intifada means, but it actually means resistance. And has it been used by some groups to suggest that this means exclusively resistance against Jewish people or the state of Israel? Yes. But like from the river to the sea, which also people don't know which river and which sea, it's the Jordan and the Mediterranean. That has been misused. And some people use that as a horrible, horrible slur, and some people take that as a horrible, horrible slur. But to infer that the phrase itself has been used by these specific people in that way is just simply not true. And it's lazy journalism, and it's smear tactics that just don't. They're designed to kill discussion. And if you're using discussion killing tactics like that, it's because you don't want the discussion to happen.
All of this is then framed by then using edits of footage of really articulate pro-Israeli protesters. So it's really interesting how it used that tactic of completely manipulating and showing pro-Palestinian demonstrators as not knowing what they're doing, etc., etc. And then it kind of used very American clips, like you said, Brent, of pro-Israeli protesters. So this film, again, isn't a documentary. It's just pure propaganda in how it's kind of setting up arguments.
It's also a bit of a therapy session for Tommy Robinson, because as you pointed out earlier, basically he doesn't seem to be quite aware of how revealing that he is in certain things that he says. I mean, for a start, he's talking about what he calls COVID zealots. But he says that essentially the reason that made these people gravitate towards a group and a leader, a strong leader, a leader that will tell them what to do, is that they basically lacked meaning in their lives and they lacked purpose in their lives. And so they were attracted to this sort of strong leader that enticed them into a group. And in this, he's very much describing his own tactics. But he goes further than this. On a documentary where he is expressly outraged and indignant about his own persecution, in which he's basically trying to rally a following and promote his own self-image, he makes this incredibly oblivious statement. They get to be part of a community. They find meaning where they had none. In their outrage, in their indignation, they get to feel good about themselves. And then he lists things that he is himself outraged about, which is Me Too, abortions, so-called vaccines, free Palestine, and transgenderism. And it's like, that is the most revealing thing and the only true thing that he said in the entire documentary is that his followers are those people that are terrified and outraged and have been drawn to this community because they find meaning in it where they had none in their own lives. And they're outraged and indignant at their own persecution. And they do that in order to make themselves feel good. And he's just revealed that. And he's too stupid to even understand that that's what he's saying.
It was so revealing. And it kind of like that point is kind of the moment it crosses over into chapter 7, which is then eliminated dissidents. And he does exactly the same thing. Like he starts saying about how not everyone is manipulated. There has to be consequences, claims the government, wants it to be costly for those that are dissenting, but doesn't want to create martyrs. And this is where he says a real kind of revealing line, because he says, create one Spartacus and you may have a revolt on your hands. And he's so clearly thinking he is Spartacus.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's so like thinking of himself. But then it just has this montage of like these other characters like him who have lost their jobs by challenging the approved government narrative. It's Mark Stein, Lawrence Fox, Calvin Robinson, Andrew Bridgen. Again, he brings in Suella Braverman and Lee Anderson. Interestingly, he's kind of mainstreaming, and then kind of ends it on this cliffhanger, like, but you know, the target could land on you. So it's again revealing himself as he is this Spartacus figure. And one thing I wanted to say, as it moved in, we've said there's been like quotes at every chapter point. And the quote for this one was like Abby Hoffman. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, what the fuck? Like, that's Weather Underground, yeah? Like,
was he the Yippies or
I can't remember whether it was Yippies or Chicago 7 or Weather Underground.
It was still this book. Was his thing, right?
Decidedly left wing, yes.
Yeah, but it's, again, the way Robinson's used the quotes, and painfully soon he's going to use an Orwell quote. And I can imagine Orwell spinning in his grave. The guy literally went to Spain to kill fascists. But it's interesting how Robinson, again, as the political chameleon, is using Abby Hoffman, is using those quotes to say that he's not right-wing, or even using Suella Braverman, using Lee Anderson to make it appear that, again, he's not this extremity, that he's part of like a bigger persecuted group. But yeah, it then kind of gets on to about this hotel and this situation that happened in Wales, which again is like, you know, there's a real manipulation of the people that they use, the way they introduce themselves, and they say, oh, I voted Labour, I voted Tory. And it's really interesting because like Tommy Robinson gets very emotional, almost interviewing these people. But he doesn't show any of that to like Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion. You know, he's very sympathetic to these demonstrators who are all locals, and, you know, it shows how bad the police are, which again, I wouldn't dispute, but there's no journalistic integrity in how he's approached this or compared to any of the other kind of protesters who he says in his 2-tier are kind of supported by the system.
I was a bit taken aback because one of them is on my Facebook page. Like, I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I was like, oh my fucking Christ, I know you. like,
no way, which one?
No, it's not. Like, because I don't want to be mean to the guy. He's just a guy.
Oh, we've narrowed it down. Then it's not the lady. Which one? I'm going to make a prediction because I haven't looked into any of these people, but I'm guessing, Neil, you probably have looked into these people. Are any of them into conspiracy kind of stuff?
Oh, of course, yeah, all of them, and like the problem with the whole thing was that the way the documentary presents it is that they had genuine concerns about things like access to healthcare if loads of people came in, but then they show their colours slightly by saying, and we're worried about the children. It's like, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, it was like a record stop. What?
Yeah. Why are you worried about the children? Which plays into this concept that girls are being raped by these foreigners, which just isn't happening. Now, the thing is, there's also sort of coded language. It's not the exact phrase, but there's something that was very akin to men of fighting age. Some of the people that are involved in it, and I'm not going to name this because these are just all people, right? Okay, but I've checked them out, and they're very fucking keen on this concept of like the Great Replacement Theory and the UN, and of course they think that COVID's fake pretty much uniformly. and that the vaccines are killers and stuff like that. And they're very sort of angry with people like Klaus Schwab and that sort of thing, and not keen on immigration, shall we say. And it's ridiculous as well. It's like, I didn't do a huge amount of research into it, but it would appear that basically nobody ever turned up at that hotel. They never even had any immigrants there. It turned out that the building wasn't safe, actually, and it was then renovated. But it would appear that didn't actually go ahead with it, which is a bit ridiculous, really, to be quite honest. Like, just to go back to like all those people that they said was sacked and stuff like that. Mark Steyn was actually sacked because he brought Naomi fucking Wolf onto his show and said some mental stuff about vaccines and COVID that got a huge Ofcom fine for the channel and meant that he was no longer financially viable. Calvin Robinson got himself sacked because he aligned himself with Lawrence Fox and Dan Wusson. Both had been accused of massive improprieties in one way or another. Lawrence Fox was sacked because he said on a news show that he wouldn't shag a woman. Like, it's not about freedom of speech, it's about professionalism in the role that you were hired to do. And that's why Lawrence Fox was sacked. And Majid Nawaz, his contract ended, but he went down the whole sort of vaccines are crimes against humanity, and that the boosters will kill you, and mental stuff, trying to appeal to the far right, like anti-vax audience, and so they decided that they wouldn't renew his contract. But this is not the same as saying, they were all sacked for having the wrong views, which is how Tommy Robinson frames it. Then Suella Braverman, Lee Anderson, Andrew Bridgen, they all lost their jobs for challenging the government narrative, apparently, even though they're in the fucking government. Make that make fucking sense. Like, the idea is that she was sacked because she wrote this article in the Times saying that the police are harder on right-wing protesters than on these limp lefty liberals. But it transpires that David Cameron was offered her job the day before that article came out. So that might be lies. She might well have been sacked for it, but she fucking well deserves to be sacked for that sort of article. She's a twat. She also was criticised for speeches calling migrants an invasion, and she also proposed to put 500 asylum seekers on a boat, like a barge, like a huge boat, and just like, which was not sanitary, and like she was going all out on the anti-immigration shit, dog whistling policies about grooming gangs. She said at one point that sleeping in tents was a lifestyle choice. She also said had several accusations of financial misconduct and misconduct as an MP, and was in general, I want to make this absolutely clear, fucking shit at her job, right? So that's why Suella Braverman was ousted. Anderson did the thing where he basically said that Khan has let London go over to his mates, the Muslim extremists. But I suspect that Anderson knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting himself up to join Reform and GB News. It's a grift that he will continue until such point that the only available work to him is as Frankenstein monster stunt doubles. Andrew Bridgen basically in 2022 lied under oath in court. Listen how fucked up this is, right? Andrew Bridgen was ousted from his brother's business because he was shit. Basically, so he got an allegedly corrupt police officer to investigate his brother on false charges of fraud in order to sort of like put pressure on him, like, which is really, really like, Jesus Christ. And in 2024, he broke lobbying rules on multiple occasions and took money and gifts that he didn't declare. And basically, blackmailed is too strong, but he pressured a member of the Select Committee on Standards, suggesting that she would be rewarded if she came to certain conclusions, and this transpired to not be true. So basically, he, he's a shithouse all round, basically. Yeah, the thing with the Llanelli Hotel is just a bit sad, really. It's like these are people looking for asylum, and it's been turned into a whole sort of separate issue by people who've got very nefarious ideals. And the point as well is, like, this goes totally against the point of the film. Like, the protest was in summer. A couple of people were arrested for trespassing on the grounds when they shouldn't have been there. Maybe the police were heavy-handed. I don't know. I haven't looked into that hard. But essentially in October, nobody had moved in by that point, and they decided to scrap the entire thing. So people power won. So how does that fit with this concept of lawfare and totalitarian state? It just doesn't. Like, yes, they were told to not go online and talk about it or go near the place. That could be seen as a little bit, that's a little bit sort of surveillance state. But again, I don't fully know the details of it, to be quite honest. And it could be that that's been misrepresented, or it could be that that's a little bit harsh. But there was an ongoing case. I honestly don't know with that, to be honest.
Well, that's normally the case, though, isn't it? When there's an ongoing case, you're told you're not allowed to speak about it on social media.
Yeah.
And that's probably what really happened there. And they're just kind of framing it as you're never allowed to speak about it on social media, because at the end of the day, what are you doing right now? You're in this documentary that's being posted on social media. So, like, come on.
Well, that does somewhat undercut his next point, which is we have no free speech, and we have no free speech so that governance can't be scrutinised. And it's like, yeah, but you're in a documentary scrutinising the government, which in many ways, and I don't want to be picky, but undercuts the central message that you can't scrutinise the government, particularly with your speech.
I always find, and just to kind of add on to the final part about this, that whole kind of demo situation in Wales, is like the conversation around immigration always looks at the most poorest people. Like it's always immigrants, the fleeing either like, war or economic depravity. And it's always about them going or being placed in poor areas where services are already undercut and restricted. Never is the conversation around the rich and how the rich move around the world and finance moves around the world, and how the rich have portfolios of properties that are all sat empty during a housing crisis. So it's really weird how the conversations around immigration are always, like I say, they always seem to be focused on the poor and most desperate people on both sides of that situation. And never does it challenge capital or the ruling class in it.
Yeah, I wonder if that's anything to do with the poorer people don't want things taken away from them, and the rich people don't mind immigrants coming in because they can exploit them.
Could well be.
Just a guess.
I mean, it's almost as if like the entire system that we've based the Western world on is based to a degree or a large part on exploitation, as if that was written into the very explanation of how the system of capitalism works. But that would be crazy. Anyway, so now here's the point. There are a couple of points here where it's like, oh shit, this has actually touched on something a little bit. The people are very unpleasant, right? Okay, or one of them I believe is very unpleasant. Do you know what actually happened with that Harry Miller guy? That copper that's really, really angry. What happened was he liked a tweet. This tweet was a limerick that was very transphobic. It's not the worst thing that I've ever seen in the world, but it's still transphobic. He liked it, right? That's all that happened. He liked it. And he was visited by police and told that this isn't an offence, but we've put you on a kind of a list or whatever. And he took them to court. And he actually won because he suggested this is almost Stalinistic. This is Stasi-like. And here's where I'm conflicted because I agree with him on that point. I think that is massive overreach. And now, I can imagine a scenario whereby you're building up profiles about somebody or whatever, and so you're collecting data or whatnot and stuff like that. And I can imagine a scenario where that would be helpful for finding like a murderer or a rapist or a terrorist or something like that. But at the same time, it opens up a really serious argument about where does your privacy end and where does your privacy start? And just liking something, even if it is deemed to be terribly offensive or whatever, is that just enough cause for somebody to visit your home and to tell you that you're on a list and to put you on a list and stuff like that. And I find myself thinking that actually this is one of the things in the actual film where basically you go, okay, this is something that could be examined further. Now, it's fucked up by the fact that this Harry Miller is clearly a fucking knobhead, right? And his personal views and his politics and his demeanor are obscene to me, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't problems with surveillance society and surveillance culture and such like that. And it doesn't really examine it further, but this is the one point in the film where I thought, in the interest of fairness, that is a serious potential problem.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Neil, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, is that a lot of these things, populism, conspiracism, always touches upon kernels of truth. There was moments when I was listening to Tommy Robinson rant about corruption in the police, etc., etc., and I thought, yes, Comrade Tommy, I'm on board, mate. Like I'm with you. But it's then when it starts dog whistling about, and it's about, great replacement stuff and our culture and our heritage. It's then, so of course, all of this stuff, there are elements that can be gleaned from it that do resonate. There's kernels of truth. And that's, I would think why a lot of people go down these rabbit holes.
Well, if you're going to poison somebody, you put it in a pie. You don't put it in a pile of shit.
Yeah.
Like, good propaganda has a degree of truth in it because it has to resonate with people. It has to be recognizable to a degree, even if that's a misrecognizing. Like, now the next example that he uses is not quite as cut and dry. And again, this is slightly strange, right? This was like the Christian guy that was persecuted. The police turned up, the mental health team turned up, and the police turned up at his thing because he'd said something at church that they deemed might be violent. Now, this bloke called John Joe Hooper, and what he said was, and this was in response to the stabbing in Australia, was it? Like the priest that was stabbed by one of the parishioners. And what John Joe had said to his priest, as Christians, what are we supposed to do? Do we rise up or take a stand? Or do we keep turning the other cheek? Because if we do, we won't have a cheek to turn. And somebody, we don't know who, reported this to the police and said that this was a suggestion that this chap might be violent or might be planning violence. And he filmed himself when the police turned up, and he explicitly states that in no way was he talking about violence. In fact, he was talking about the opposite, not violence. And in many ways, I sympathise with this. I think this is over policing on the surface, and I think that it's potentially, indicative of nanny statism and misdirected energies, shall we say. On the other hand, there is a mental health person there, and this is horrible because I don't wish to slander this gentleman, right? Because I don't know. But hypothetically, if this was happening to a completely different person, you might wonder if this was the first time that they'd done that, or if there was any context to this that we didn't know, whereby somebody felt that this was the time where they might phone the police. And I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying that is possible. And so in that situation, and in the Harry Miller as well, we lack context. And I don't want to come across as, well, that obviously means they're both bastards, but that's a possibility. And again, that's also a complete not a possibility. But do you see what I mean? There may be more to this that we don't understand. And I don't want to be, this is going to make me sound desperately unfair, right? Okay, but John Joe Hooper in the Daily Mail said, they came here with an agenda, but they didn't get the outcome that they wanted. The agenda was to make me look like a right-wing nutter. And you think, okay, that's fine. I understand that, and I can see that. And I don't think that is fair. However, he goes on to say, it's discrimination. It means we're not allowed to have a traditional view of faith. It all has to be this new age, left-wing, infiltrated church. 50 or 60 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. also, I looked into it, and apparently he has fears that Christianity will be wiped out. And so, again, potentially this adds a layer of context to this seemingly heavy-handed visit by the police. It's difficult to say with that because I don't know. But everything else that we've seen in this documentary thus far, all right, has been lies or manipulation. So to suggest that potentially these incidents have also been taken wildly out of fucking context is fair. What does he say then? They don't solve the trouble. They silence the people who talk about the trouble. And it's like, well, that's bollocks, isn't it? Because then if that was true, then it would be obvious to everybody because it would be in constant trouble.
Yeah, it's kind of at this moment it uses this Nayak Gabani as well, this guy that kind of goes on pro-Palestinian demos and holds Hamas as a terrorist sign. And they really go heavy, spend a lot of time with this guy. He interviews him. And again, it's that same tact that we've seen throughout this entire film of one individual, almost, provoking a situation and then using it to make themselves out as a victim. And then the film kind of compares it because the guy's from Iran, just there's dark, dramatic music. And you're right, this is where Tommy claims the state doesn't deal with the problem, but the people that highlight the problem. And to back this up, to back up this point, who does he quote? 1 hour, 12 minutes into the documentary, Enoch Powell. He's finally revealed the truth of it all. He uses this quote from Enoch Powell to back up basically that point of that they don't deal with the problem, but the people that highlight the problem. And then to end this chapter, it ramps it up even further. If you can't silence them, it cuts to loads of clips of journalists being murdered in Russia, Saudi Arabia.
Which apparently he fucking likes and at the same time doesn't fucking like.
Yeah.
Do you know why Nir Gabani was actually arrested? Because they claiming the thing that he was arrested for holding of a Hamas equals terrorist site. Do you know why he was actually arrested? He was being racist whilst waving a banana at a black pro-Palestine protester.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just eating it. I was just eating a banana was his claim. And people went, fuck off, mate. We're not idiots. And so, yeah, again. So can you believe another thing that was completely misrepresented? The only thing that's not been misrepresented in this film is the fact that they did turn up to that Christian guy's house, but we don't know the context of why that might have been. And the other one, which is actually genuinely sort of okay, this may be something that requires looking at, which is the fact that they went after that guy, Harry Miller, because he liked something. But again, we don't know the context. As far as I know, and I don't know, and I'm not saying this is it, he might be a fucking 20-year Combat 18 veteran. And so they're following him and looking at things like that because they have an ongoing case against him. I don't think that's the case, but do you know what I mean? Again, these things are presented without any context, just as this is an example of a totalitarian state, which I'll keep repeating. If this was a totalitarian state, this film wouldn't fucking exist.
And then we kind of race into the final chapter 8, which is re-educated dissidents. And this is where Tommy claims that not everyone gets killed and those that don't need to be re-educated. And again, he kind of makes a real cheap shot at, shows some diversity training, kind of poking fun at kind of corporate videos dealing with this topic of inclusion, etc., which again is really easy to kind of poke fun at. And then just before it kind of comes to the final, where there's going to be a credit where it says, why totalitarianism? There was a couple of revealing quotes that I just loved. One of the guests, I can't remember who it was, one of the talking heads said, the reason we're actually criticizing the establishment is because we want them to be better. We're not anarchists. And I was like, brilliant. Thank you so much for letting me know. because you were coming across
fuck off.
Yeah. And then, like, I think Andrew Bridgen then quotes, like, Winston Churchill. So, again, it's this whole point that a lot of their arguments, they are cut from the cloth of the establishment. You know, fascism comes from the roots of things like colonialism. So, yeah, for me, it started becoming very kind of revealing, and then kind of just used like a George Orwell quote, which just felt so cringeworthy.
Which one was it they used again? It was fucking so, like, crowbarred in.
If you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatsoever, you've beaten them.
In brackets, unless you're black.
Yeah.
Right? Fuck off. Like, fuck off, Tony Robbins. Again, as you astutely pointed out, Orwell would hate you. You're everything that Orwell was trying to fight against. Honestly, in chapter 8, my notes are, they re-educate white privilege, equality and diversity. Hang on, these things are only a problem if you're a racist or a massive twat.
Yeah.
There are failure of Iraq, failure of, like, population grew 7. Oh, fuck off. Like, he gets all these figures wrong. This is what annoys me. Is like, oh, the population grew 750,000 in 2023. A, don't care, right? B, like, what he's implying is, and some of those weren't white, which is a problem. And it's like, it's not a problem, though, is it? It's not a problem unless you're a massive twat, right? Net migration in 2022 was 745,000. It was 672,000 in 2023. But the problem is that, like, at the minute, like, this is not meaningful in any sense on its own. Families are smaller. People are living for longer, right? The rate of growth of population in the UK has slowed. So this idea that there's an explosion, and it fucks me off, right? Because it's like, you can see this graph, which is going down, and you claim it's going up. And then when it comes to climate change, all of a sudden you're completely backwards with your graph understandings. Like, it's almost as if you're all just like contrarian dickheads. Then he goes into sort of like, oh, the failure of COVID. Oh, the country shut down. You can't ask questions. You can't ask questions about excess deaths and vaxxers. Yes, you fucking can. You absolutely can. It's just that the conspiracy crowd don't like the answers. And there's been numerous meta-studies that have come out recently that have shown completely undoubtedly that vaccines helps prevent death and serious illness in COVID. So you're all just twats. All this idea that, like, microchips or, you know, you're going to die from the vaccine or 5G, you're just idiots. You're just imbeciles that basically haven't got the fucking maturity or mental capacity to say, I was terrified by a situation, so I delved into cosplay for 3 or 4 years and maybe fucked up my life, because I'd sooner do that than take some minor inconvenience in a world pandemic which is somehow fucking about me. You fucking mouse. Like, this is what it's like. Fucking, Christ. They wouldn't do this at Waco. Waco would fight. What's wrong with you? Because you're fucking truthers. You're fucking pussies. Like before COVID, it was all memes about, I'm going to go and stay in the fuck society. I want to X myself from the grid and stuff like that. The second you can go to the fucking gym, you collapsed. You fucking useless bastards. Anyway, he then goes on to talk about how climate change is bollocks, which obviously, and he says this ridiculous thing: follow the money. It's like, I have followed the money. All the people that are dissenters of climate change are connected to fossil fuel industries, and they're not qualified. They're geologists, or they're not climatologists or even meteorologists. A lot of the time, they're people that have very, very tangential connections to science and are financed literally by either the fossil fuel industry or think tanks like the Heartland Institute that are essentially think tanks for fossil fuels, that are lobbying organizations. Then he goes into anti-trans nonsense. Then he goes into sort of fucking like pro-Putin stuff, all these biolabs and NATO expansionism. And at this point, like the note I put is, Christ, man, the vein in his head is fucking massive. And it is. And then he does a speech, which he's trying to be sort of Chilean. And there were two things. I didn't listen to it because it was just blustering bollocks. Like, and it went over me like hiss over someone's shoes. But there were two things that really struck me. One, he couldn't afford to buy the rights to World in Union. So he bought an AI reconstruction of something that sounds a little bit like World in Union and has that same sort of uplifting thing. And two, in this speech, he uses the phrase, who cower like cowards. The man is a prick. Like, and that's it. And that sums up the fucking film. It's the sort of documentary that has the phrase, people who cower like cowards in it. And that shows you the caliber of it.
My favourite moment at the end, though, was when he was doing that big speech. Like, he does a speech with Parliament behind him, and he's addressing, like, the camera as if it's, like, the state. And he's, like, saying, you know, so to the leaders of our nation, the people elected to serve us. Like, he's running at camera, doing this whole speech. And then he finishes it, and he turns to his left, and it goes to another camera angle, and he addresses that camera as if it's the people. And he's like, yes, so we, the people, we will fight. And I just thought, this is so cringe. I just imagined when they came up with that idea, they probably thought it was brilliant. They probably thought it's a moment of like cinematic genius.
Which way did he turn? Did he turn to the right or to the left? Did he turn to the right?
I'm not sure.
If you turn to the right, because if you turn to the left, subconsciously, that means that he's a liar. And if you turn to the right, that means that subconsciously the audience are on the left.
I'm so glad we got to the end. And
we've not got to the end just yet. Because okay. I have something that I wish to add, which is that throughout the entire film, there was a through line that Tommy Robinson was in some way fighting against sex abuse against children, and sex abuse against children specifically by grooming gangs that may have been of Muslim persuasion or, say, Pakistani origin or foreign. And it's just strange because there are certain people who know Tommy Robinson personally, who are connected to these far-right groups like the EDL, that Tommy Robinson has not really made a big deal about. And these are people like Jack Renshaw of the EDL, who was jailed for 4 times inciting a child to sexual activity. Or Bradley Daniel Alford, who sent indecent photos and arrested and jailed for inciting a child to engage in sexual intercourse. Christopher Allen of the SDL, who engaged in sexual conduct with a 13-year-old. Or Luke Atkinson of UKIP and the EDL, who was jailed for grooming teenagers. Or Alan Bolter of the EDL, who was reprimanded by the police for attempted grooming. Or John Broomfield of the EDL, who again was reprimanded by the police for attempted grooming. Dean Chambers of the EDL and the BNP was jailed for 2 attempted rapes. Bruce Cardwell of the EDL was jailed for grooming. Michael Coven, who's a neo-Nazi and a friend of Tommy Robinson, was jailed for possession of child porn. Alan Thomas Ellis of the EDL sent sexual texts to a 14-year-old girl. Robert Ewing of National Action groomed and murdered a 15-year-old girl. Ryan Fleming of National Action engaged in sexual activity with a child. Darren Francis of the BNP had sex with a 13-year-old girl. Christopher Gamlin was arrested and prosecuted for inciting a child to sexual activity. Pete Gillet of the EDL, well, he raped and indecently assaulted several children. Nigel Hemmonday of the BNP was arrested and imprisoned for possession of child porn. Dale Hewitt of the EDL was arrested and was prosecuted for sex offences against teenage girls. Ian Hindle of the BNP was prosecuted for sexual activity with a 14-year-old girl. Mark Hogg of the EDL was prosecuted for sexual assault of a 14-year-old. Elliot Jones of the EDL was prosecuted for inciting a child into sexual activity. Mervyn Jones of the North Wales Alliance was prosecuted for rape, attempted rape and assault. Sean Jones of Liverpool Nationalist raped a 12-year-old girl. Michael Kinnear of the BNP and the EDL was found guilty of offences relating to child porn and abuse of a 7-year-old girl. Brett Moses of the EDL was found guilty of grooming a child. Paul O'Brien, who was a member of Blood and Honour, was found guilty of rape and sexual assault. Stephen Pear of the SDL groomed a 13-year-old. Michael Rolls of the BNP was found guilty of possession of child porn and the sexual abuse of a 10-year-old girl. Mike Riley of Britain First was found guilty of sex offences against multiple young girls. Mark Stamen of the EDL was found guilty of kidnap and rape of a 10-year-old girl. James Swindlehurst was found guilty of 13 counts of child rape. Trevor Vinson of the EDL was found guilty of abuse and child porn and abuse of a 3-year-old child. Andrew Nels of the BNP was found guilty of sex with a 14-year-old. Matthew Woodward of the EDL was found guilty of possession of child porn and grooming of a 13-year-old. Why is Tommy Robinson not mentioned any of these people or turned up at these people's trials? It seems strange because he knows them personally. And so he probably is aware of these things. I'm assuming he didn't actually know people involved in other grooming gangs. And yet he does know these people personally. He's friends with them. And yet he hasn't petitioned their trials. He hasn't brought them up in the public. He hasn't actually, I don't think, denounced their actions. It's almost as if he wants to pretend that he doesn't know a huge amount of people who've been convicted for paedophilic and sexual assaults. It's strange, isn't it?
I'm just speechless at the length of that list. You were like not even halfway through, and I thought, this is pretty long. And then you turned the page, and I was like, wow.
And if I'm brutally honest, I didn't do a huge amount of research into that. There may well be more. Who can say? Just like we can't say if these illegal immigrants might be men of fighting age coming here to fuck us all up or whatever. Who's to say that everyone that doesn't interact with Tommy Robinson might be a proven sex offender? I mean, by his own logic, you've got to take that possibility into consideration every time you look at that man's face.